And just to let you know that the session is being recorded as well. And I just wanted to see if both of you are here, since we all have our cameras off, Joey Ann as well as Navneet. If you wouldn't mind typing into chat where you are located and what your current position is, what your role is. So, Joanne, you are from Timmins and you are a recruiter. Wonderful. And then what about Navneet? You are located in Sudbury. Perfect. And so we'll go through a little bit more as well. I'll ask you a little bit more specific questions around just around your background, just to give me some perspective as well. Sometimes we have in the group those who are recruiters who are exclusively on the candidate side. Sometimes we have 360s who do both, and then sometimes those who are more on the business development side. So just to introduce myself, just wanted to thank both of you as well for being here. And as you're getting prepared for your CPC, the session today is one of my favorites on recruitment and selection, on really talking about that candidate generation, the candidate management side of things, and some of the issues that were surrounding that. So Navneet is saying you also do both. You do both. Okay, so a little bit on both sides. Perfect. Thanks for clarifying. And we're going to be doing a lot of collaborating, and really my goal is that I can help further enhance some of your skills around the how-tos that will strengthen your role in recruitment. My name is Jill Cantor. I have 20 years of experience in the staffing industry, all with Applin, and I am based in Winnipeg, Manitoba. Applin is across Canada, but my role is
I think I mean, I don't know how to go about it, obviously,
oh,
but we need to talk to him.
Okay. And so as I was saying, I've been for 20 years with Applin. I'm based in Winnipeg, Manitoba, and I've been doing training with ACSESS for about 6 years. And my role for the last about 10 years in the industry has been in training and development, specifically around anything from our new hires that get started, just on the day one of what recruiting is, right through to the executive level. For the session today, it's really meant to be interactive. And again, I know we have a smaller group, so hopefully both of you wouldn't mind in partaking in some of the questions into chat, or even coming offline and asking questions or sharing some of your insights. I do encourage to turn your cell phone off, just so that you can really stay focused and reduce as many distractions as possible, just so you can really get the most out of the session. Take lots of notes, and then certainly by all means ask lots of questions. And so you both have mentioned where you're located and that you're both recruiting. Maybe just in chat, if you wouldn't mind just sharing a little bit around a little bit more about that. So how long have you been in the industry? Under a year, right up to 10 plus years. Also love to know what type of recruiting you're doing. Are you on more temporary, temp contract? Are you doing direct hire perm, hybrid? And then at the same time, you've already mentioned what your actual role is, but if you wouldn't mind just sharing a little bit more, that would be great. So 8 years, all BD and occasional 360. Oh, so welcome. I didn't see you join there, Alyssa, so welcome. So Navneet is saying you do both candidate, okay, under 1 year, temporary, a bit of perm as well. I cover office clerical. Joey Ann, you were saying you have 7 years experience in recruitment in the Philippines, but here in Canada, it's going to be a year next month, temp and contract. Okay, well, happy anniversary for both of you who have been in it for about a year. And then, is it Alicia? Hopefully I'm mentioning your
Alicia.
name. How do you say it?
Alicia.
Alicia. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you I would not have known. So thank you for clarifying. And I was just mentioning I wasn't sure if you were there. I have recovering from quite a cold. So I have chosen to go off camera for today. And by all means, you guys feel free to hop on or off camera. All is good. But I wanted to walk us through the ACSESS Code of Ethics, as it's always important to serve as a reminder. As members, it's a bit of a mouthful, so I'm going to read it off here. As members of the Association of Canada of Search, Employment and Staffing Services, we commit to uphold this code of ethics and standards and to display it prominently in our place of business. So I know some of us work from home. I know in my place of business, when we were all in the office, we did have our code of ethics posted in our front lobby. We support the principles set forth below and acknowledge that compliance with these principles is the best interests of ACSESS member companies, their candidates, employees, client organizations, and the reputation of the search, employment, and staffing services profession in Canada. And so when we're looking overall at what the ACSESS mission statement is, it's really to promote the interests and growth of the Canadian recruitment staffing industry. And we accomplish this in many ways. So we identify, communicate, and monitor industry standards and ethical business, positively influence and protect the regulatory and business environment that impacts our members, promotes credibility, visibility of the industry to the business community, government, general public, and then providing our members with strategic support services, programs like this one, and tools to assist them in achieving their goals and objectives. One of the other things that, whether it's not stated in the mission statement, but something that I've always talked about that's really important and a good guideline to be keeping in mind is that no matter what our role is, no matter what how long we've been in the industry, what it is their area of focus is, it's really upholding the standards of the industry and all of us truly being ambassadors for our brand and then being ambassadors for the industry. And that's really what is behind this learning and development and being able to set standards and set expectations and really, again, be that ambassador so that we're really putting our best foot forward and putting the reputation of our industry's best foot forward as well. So we're going to go through quite a bit. Again, I do encourage you to take some notes so that when you're studying to write your exam, hopefully you'll have some good study notes to help you in responding to some of those questions in the exam itself. And so a lot of this might seem pretty obvious and it might sound pretty counterintuitive or too intuitive to what we are going to be talking about today because you have all been in the industry for about a year or over, some with more years experience. And so while some of it may seem pretty simple and straightforward, I'm hoping that I'll be able to share a little bit of further insight. Maybe some of it's a refresher or just some reminders on defining the recruitment and selection and how we go about in conducting ourselves. And so how do we define recruitment at the end of the day? It sounds pretty straightforward, but really the recruitment and selection process is one of the most important aspects of running new and established businesses. And so really for our clients, the right employees can really make or break how their company evolves and how their company operates. And we know that when we're working with clients and if we're finding the wrong candidates or they're making the wrong hires, it can truly hurt the business by, for those clients, those companies missing sales, maybe they're turning their customers off because they don't have the right people in place. They're potentially creating a toxic work environment. And so when we really think about how do we work with our clients and how do we work with our candidates at every single step of the recruitment process and the selection process, it helps to put together the ability for us to enhance our clients' business culture, to enhance our clients' goals, to enhance our clients' objectives. So our job isn't just to put people into seats. Our job isn't just to put a candidate in a chair at a client's office or in their facility or whatever that might look like. It's really about putting the right fit. So how do we first focus on, well, what is recruitment itself, but then also that selection process. And so while it sounds like it's the same thing, there are some differentiating factors there. And so the recruitment itself is the process of choosing the right person for the right position at the right time. So it's not just putting a bum in a seat, it's putting the right person in the right position at the right time for the right company. And so recruitment also refers to that process of how do we attract the candidates? How do we select the candidates? How do we appoint potential candidates to meet our clients' requirements? And then whereas from a selection point of view, it's really the idea of the selection process. We go through all the recruiting and we attract and we find and we source and we interview, but then it's the selection of that. And this is really us working to find and pick the right candidate who is the most suitable for the vacant job. So it's one thing to interview and get a bunch of resumes and screen and interview and profile a bunch of candidates, but it's really that selection. So if you have 10 candidates in front of you, if we were only so lucky to have 10 really good candidates or 10 viable candidates, but let's say you've got 5 candidates in front of you and the client only wants to see 3. How do you select that? And what are some of the standards and the expectations of which we measure that against? And that's where we look at those KSAOs. And so I'm just curious if anyone knows, what is a KS, without Googling it or putting into chat, GPT, what is KSAO? Does anyone know what that means? Whether you want to type it into chat or whether you want to come off mute and just share what KSAO stands for.
I'm just making a guess over here.
Yeah.
S might stand for skill, K might be for knowledge,
Yeah.
A might be for attitude. Oh, not too sure about O.
Okay, so you're very close, very close. So K is for knowledge, S is for skills, A is for abilities. But in fact, I actually really love attitude because that is also really important, right? Attitude ties back to culture fit as well, but it's for abilities and then other. So KSAOs. And so it's really working with the client to understand, well, what is the knowledge that is required? What are the skills? What are the abilities? So first we have to understand that, does this person meet those KSAOs? And then that culture piece comes in as well. And we talk about that later. And so there's different authors out there who look at the difference between recruiting and selection. They've often defined selection in different ways. Some of the definitions of selection could be employee selection is a process of putting an applicant on a right job. Selection could be an employee is a process of choosing the applicants who have the qualifications. This all sounds pretty much similar. Selection is a process of identifying, hiring applicants. Employee selection is a process of matching organizations' requirements. And so really it's all about like measuring the candidate based on the client's requirements. And how do we do that in a fair and equitable way so that candidates are getting the fair and equal opportunities in front of the clients. And so again, the KSAOs, really, this really looks at the knowledge refers to the body of factual or procedural information that can be applied, such as the knowledge of a foreign language or the knowledge of a computer programming language. So those are the facts. They either have that language or they don't have that language. They either have that skill or they don't have that skill. They either have that university degree or they don't have the university degree. So those are like the hard facts. And then you get into the softer skills and personality characteristics as well. And so there are so many influencing factors that we do want to be thinking about as we're thinking around the recruiting process. And some of the factors that really influence the client, there's so many things that are coming into play in the recruitment process. And these are things that are important for us to be keeping in mind as well when we are working with clients, and we're working with candidates too. But if we're in front of the client too, it's also recognizing so much is going on potentially that we're aware of or behind the scenes. And so there's so many influencing factors. Money is often a factor. So what is the salary or the hourly rate that they have? What is their budget for recruiting? What is their budget for our fees? So we're kind of factoring some of those in. What are the relationships like with recruiters? Do they have other recruiting firms that they're working with? What are those relationships like? How far along are they in the process with that? How do they respect relationships with recruiters? Do they like to quote unquote play by the rules? Do they like Are they cooperative? Are they engaging? Do they go missing in action? Other factors that influence the hiring and the decision-making and the recruitment and selection is, well, what is the level of position to fill? So what is that level of position? And are we equipped for that? Is working for entry-level roles actually in our wheelhouse if we're used to more senior level roles, and vice versa? So how successful can we actually be? What is the current market condition, right? What is the demand? What is the current market conditions and the demand for these types of individuals? What's the state of the client's internal business? What's happening internally in the company? Are there going to be potential roadblocks based on what's going on in their organizations? What is their company policy overall? Do they promote from within first? And if they do we know that? Do we know if they're going to promote from within, but still kind of testing the waters to see who else is out there? Are we asking those questions so that we know what we're up against? Is their company policy to only hire from externally? Is their company policy to only hire from within the industry, or do they prefer to only hire without people with the industry experience? What are some of the legislations that we need to be aware of? Is there pay equity? What about minority? There's a lot of legislations that we need to think about. And then just general time constraints. What does that look like? How quickly does the client need to hire somebody? They say that we need somebody yesterday, but then you have to wait 6 weeks to get information back from them. How long is the contract fulfillment? What kind of time constraint is that? And so there's so many different factors that are going on that really influence how, number one, how successful we're going to be when working with clients, and what's sort of required in terms of that search and what we put into that. And so if you're a recruiter or a search consultant, so if you're a recruiter, or if you're on the client side, the candidate side, or both, then you are definitely well aware of the fact that because of all these multiple objectives and multiple factors of recruitment that go on during the hiring process, we also recognize that not all what we call recruitment objectives are created equal. So just like everything else, some are more important than others. And it would make more sense that the ones that are more important are the ones that lead mostly to direct success. And so I'll go through some examples to clarify, but in the case of, let's say, a corporate recruiter or HR professional, that success for them in our clients is represented by hiring the best candidate. So if they're a corporate recruiter, they're a talent acquisition, their success is represented by hiring the best candidate. And so, whereas for us as professional recruiters and search consultants, our success is represented by a successful placement of the best candidate for the position with the client. And so what's really important is to understand, well, what is our objective and what is our client's objective? And understanding the objectives of the recruitment and hiring is really important. Number one, to make sure that everyone is on the same page and that we're all working towards that same common goal. So in terms of objectives of recruitment, there are two that are pretty critical. And the number one, whether it's our clients doing the internal hiring and that's their goal is to find the best possible person, or if it's our goal to find the best possible candidate for our clients, there's really important objectives that we're considering. And that balanced candidate evaluation. Right? At the end of the day, it's super important that there's a balance in how candidates are being evaluated, meaning that we have standards, we have norms to ensure that the recruiting is happening in a fair way for all candidates. And so how are we balancing that? The candidate's capability to do the job. Are we being fair in comparison one candidate to the next? Are we comparing apples to apples or oranges to apples? We're balancing their willingness to do the job. So number one, does the candidate have the capability to do the job? How about their motivation or their willingness, which again is a separate matter altogether, is identifying motivation, but then their ability to also positively interact with management, with peers and subordinates. So that's comes into personality and soft skills, as well as their cultural fit. And so you're looking at, again, can they do the job? Do they want to do the job? And then how do they interact with others? And then another key area that I mentioned is a whole other, area in of itself that's super important is the candidate's willingness to join an organization. So their willingness to join an organization. And we'll talk about, you could have a candidate that can do the job, like 1,001%. They are like the best on paper. And they want to do the job, like they can do their job, that particular job. They can interact well, but do they actually want to join that company? And often as recruiters, we get into this mindset where we're trying to squish a square peg into a round hole because they might be the best candidate out there and we need that candidate. And I'm going to do everything I can in my power to make that candidate want to look at that job. And that doesn't always work in our favor. So the candidate's willingness to join the organization, this is really also where the company culture and the employer branding really enter that picture. So an organization and any recruiter working for that organization must brand the employer in a positive way. And this is not just during the recruiting and hiring process. This is an objective of recruitment that is non-negotiable. No matter how good the job itself is, if the candidate does not feel compelled to work for the organization, then it doesn't matter how good the job is. So what is their willingness? So yes, we want to uphold our clients. You know, we want to speak positively about the client. We want to represent them properly. They should be representing themselves properly, but not misleading. It's also important to recognize that when we're working with candidates, we want to share challenges as well as the good stuff. So, but if they're not willing to join, they're not willing to join. So you can lead the horse to the trough, but you can't force it to drink from the water. And so we're going to talk about a little bit around some client candidate sources. We're going to talk about how we, a little bit, again, maybe a refresher on some candidate sourcing, and probably a lot of other newer ways and technologies and ways to find candidates. But one of the things that we always want to keep in mind is that we never, ever want to assume that we're going to be the successful candidate. We already obviously know this, that we can't assume that we're going to be the only one that's helping them find candidates. Even if we're the only firm, which is rare these days, helping the client find candidates, we have to expect that at the same time, they will be looking for their own candidates. And we already know that, like that's pretty standard fare. But it goes back to why, as recruiters, that sense of urgency should be at the forefront of anything and everything that we do. Urgency and urgency and urgency, because they are putting up their own job postings. They have internal recruiters contacting the same candidates that we're contacting through LinkedIn. Word of mouth. Have we uncovered if they promote from within? Have we uncovered if they're going back to old resumes of people that applied to them in the long time ago? Have we uncovered, do they have internal referral fees so that people internally refer people and they get a fee for that? So we can't assume. And companies really have to move quickly if they hope to compete for the most sought after talent. And so employers, often our clients often fit into two categories: the ones who are hiring quick and the ones who are hiring slow. Sometimes we have a client that says they need somebody yesterday, and again, 6 weeks later, we haven't heard from them. But either way, we have to respond quickly. We want to make sure that we're moving things in a fast direction. And so we want to be thinking around, well, who really is our main competitor? Who really is our main competitor? And our main competitor isn't other firms. Our main competitor is often, again, the client's own team, as I've alluded to. It's HR. It's the internal recruitment team in HR. It's promotions. It's, oh, I didn't realize that you might have somebody that you would transfer from one branch to another, or one city or country to the next. What about former employees that are willing to come back, or that left on really good terms and they decide to bring them back? What about their own internal job postings? What about those employee referrals? You know, get $1,000 if you refer somebody and they get hired and stay for 3 months. What about those previous applicants? And so I learned the hard way, but over years, to ask all of these questions. And I know that sometimes clients don't give us enough time to ask a lot of good questions, but it comes down to really understanding, well, what are we actually up against? Because there's nothing worse in recruiting than surprises. Surprises are fun in many ways, but in recruiting, often surprises aren't as fun. We want to make sure that we are on top of things and that we know what's happening. And so while we obviously work closely with the internal recruitment team and with HR, we're not there to replace them. We're obviously there to help to support them. We want to work together and not against them, but we also want to make sure that we fully understand what it is that, that we are up against, so then we know how to operate. And so then this is where we really look at the kind of the initial steps in recruiting. And as I mentioned, for many, this will be probably a refresher. It might feel repetitive. And hopefully there's a couple of new things that will come to light. And so now that we've kind of defined, obviously, what recruitment is, we want to think about the high level steps in recruiting. And while we have to act quickly, while we need to always operate with the utmost highest level of urgency in this business, otherwise we'll lose out, there is also, on the same token, such a thing as going too fast. And so what do I mean by that? In recruitment, there is also such a thing as going too fast. So if anybody wants to come online and share what I mean by that, or type it into chat. How is there such a thing in recruitment as going too fast, even after I said we always have to operate with urgency?
It might be that we're going too fast, picking up the wrong candidate in a rush that client might find a candidate by themselves.
Okay. Okay, keep going.
And we need to be quick to find the candidate so that we don't end up losing on the job order, but not going too fast that we end up getting the wrong candidate for the client, which might end up in a disaster as well if the candidate, quits the job or is not a good fit, and it ends up in like a month or so.
Okay. Right, perfect. So any others that would add to that? So yes, we want to act very fast in terms of finding candidates. Like, that's key. The candidates is everything. Without candidates, we could have all the job orders we want, but if we don't have the candidates, we don't make the placements. And so, oh, I see something popped up into chat. Let's see what that says here. Sometimes candidate has lots of options and the client took a long time to respond about the candidate and they end up accepting the other job. Yes, so that is true too. So we want to move quickly in terms of working with our candidates. We want to move quickly in terms of encouraging our clients to move quickly and talking to them about what happens if they take too long. We're going to start back at square one. The good candidates are going to get scooped up, all of that kind of stuff. But we also want to make sure, as it relates to recruitment and selection, that we want to make sure that we don't compromise our quality. We don't want to compromise the integrity of the entire process by making mistakes or costly oversights. And so, as the old adage goes, you can't choose between doing it fast or doing it well. You have to do it both fast and do it well. So you want to do it quickly, but you want to do it well. You don't want to cut corners. There's some corners that can be cut that aren't compromising to the integrity of the search, but you also want to make sure that you're operating with quality. Agreed to that. Okay, perfect. Thank you, Joanne. And so let's talk a little bit about the job order intake, and also taking some of what we'll talk about with a little bit of a grain of salt, recognizing that you are all working on different kinds of desks. Some of you might have time to work with a client to get a full 1 hour job order. I know when I was running a very, very busy sales and marketing desk for many years, I was able to get an hour with most clients for a job order, but I was working a perm desk and it may have been a little bit different at that time. I understand that now, depending on the type of desk, you're lucky if you get 10 minutes with some clients. You're lucky if you get 5 minutes. You're lucky if you get an email with a fully detailed requisition of what's required. And so some of it is also, so this is kind of best practices. A lot of the stuff that I share is in the best case scenario, in an ideal perfect world, and then you have to disseminate the information and break it down a little bit to what might be the most relevant for you. But what really needs to happen first? And when we think about the job order intake, there's things that we need to think about. And so number one, well, what is the purpose? Obviously, it's to get a recruiter great opportunities to help fill a role. At the end of the day, the purpose of a job order is to help us figure out what are the qualifications? What are the requirements of a particular position in a company before we engage candidates? And coming up with some appropriate questions so that we can get a better sense of the skills. We get a better sense of the traits that are needed by someone to succeed in a given job. And so really to me, if all else fails, the job order is the single most important aspect of the search. Because with a poorly written job order, with a poor job intake, we know we're going to run into a lot of issues. We're going to run into finding the wrong candidates. We're going to not know how to sell the opportunity to the candidates. And so we might get a lot of no's rather than yeses because we don't have enough information. And again, a lot of this comes back to that whole idea of how do we educate the clients that why this is such a critical phase of the process. And so I guess I could ask that question if you wanted to take a minute to type into chat. Why? Like, why is this probably the most important part of the entire process? Again, we can get job orders. And I know it's not to say that's easy to find job orders. We can find candidates, we can find job orders, but we can find jobs to work on, we can find candidates, but that job order is like the most important part of it all. It sets the stage for everything. And so why should an organization or clients be willing to do this? What's the selling factor? How do we educate the client on the critical nature of a proper job order?
Just
We
a
can
way to be
find,
able to kind of like best promote the organization. Like, how would they be able to best promote the company so that the recruiter working on it can go to market appropriately and just be able to engage about any additional functions outside of what's detailed in the job description?
yeah. And so remind me, what you said, what is your area? You said 8 years, all BD, occasional 360.
Yeah, exactly.
And so do you find that you get clients that are kind of turning away from wanting to spend time giving job orders?
No, I think that I mean, it's just most important part of making sure that we're able to successfully find what it is that they're looking for, right? Like the short period of time that you're able to spend with us will allow us to be able to really tailor our efforts more appropriately and make sure that we're engaging with the right folks to pursue the position. So I think that if you're kind of detailing it in that way and just making sure that they're aware of what our success rate is based on having that engagement with direct managers or the recruitment team or whatever the kind of preferred process is for the organization. I think the more access and information that you have, the better it is for you to be successful in your efforts.
Yeah, yeah, beautiful. And sometimes we do need to really remind them of that because I know I've been hearing that clients have less time, they want to spend less time, but if we're finding those clients that are willing to do that, or we're explaining the why, that it helps in the long run, it's going to actually reduce time that they have to talk to you or go back and forth because we'll have the information from the get-go. And I love what Navneet says here is I would say that the job order is the heart of the entire process. Love it. I love that, 100%. Okay, great. So we are all on the same page that we understand why it's so important. And really at the end of the day, again, as I mentioned, and I always talk about anything when it comes to client, really any kind of client interaction, it's educating. And we are constantly having to educate the client and the candidate in various ways, but educating the client, because again, there are still those some that are like, I've got 5 minutes, and that's it. Or can't I just send you an email? Well, we have to educate the client why that 5-minute job description isn't always enough, because those poorly qualified jobs are a major contributor to failure for recruitment consultants. And without it, filling the job order becomes so much harder. And so what would happen, right, if we didn't qualify our jobs properly? Right, a lot of things would happen, right? Wrong candidates, fall offs. I think we all know that there's nothing worse than having a fall off and having to rework a job that we've already been paid for and that we've already worked on. Frustrated candidates, it damages our reputation. Frustrated clients because they think that we can't do our job properly. Meanwhile, at the same time, they weren't willing to allow us to do our job properly because they didn't give us the time to help us do our job properly. So there's so many things that do happen. But there's so much value to us and to the client and to the candidate on why, right? For us, obviously, we're going to be more likely to fill it. We can work in a targeted fashion. We know what kind of candidate we're going after. It's not just kind of putting a pie in the sky and hoping that we find somebody. It's easier to sell our opportunities to candidates, and that's so important. The more information we have and the more targeted, and again, more likely to make money, client, greater confidence. Like if they go through this process, they'll have a greater confidence that we actually know what we're looking for on their behalf. Better quality resumes. They're just going to get better candidates. And typically also candidates come better prepared for the interviews. They're not wasting clients' times. We can't properly prepare our clients and help them go to see our clients if we don't know what we're preparing them for as well. And then candidates, again, goes without saying, just more information, easier for them to say yes to the job, to at least even just be willing to submit their resume to the job. And then hopefully quicker processes. So there's only upside in terms of a good, long, proper job order when we can get it. And so the job orders are that process really of, as we know, of reviewing qualifications and requirements of a particular position. And then, by coming up with some good questions, then we can get a better sense. And there's lots of things that we're looking at, and that goes beyond even this scope here, but so many things. And obviously, what's the content of the job? What are they actually expected to do that's beyond what's in the bullet points in the job description that's on their website or that they sent to us? What is the client actually looking for, right? Beyond, here's the 5 bullet points of what skills they bring. Now, sometimes in a highly technical role, it is so skills-based as well, right? It's really, you've either got this Java and .NET and or whatever. I don't even know half the jargon when it comes to IT roles, but they either have those things or they don't. But again, we need to know that. The company site information. Well, what do we need to know about the company that goes beyond just what's on their website? What is the working environment like at the end of the day? What is it like? We don't want to have surprises. We don't want to place candidates where if they're going into the office and the working environment is completely opposite from what that candidate's really looking for. Obviously, the salary, urgency. And this is one that we often forget to really delve into with the client. At the end of the day, how quickly do we need to find someone? Now, I know that you're going to say, client, that you needed them yesterday. But at the end of the day, if we bring you somebody at the end of the day today, if we can move that fast, are you prepared to hire them in 3 days from now? What are the steps in play? When are you actually wanting someone to start? Because I'm sure many of us have been through that process where it's the whole hurry up and wait, as I've mentioned. We need them yesterday. Great. We're going to get you 3 amazing people in the next 48 hours. Our recruiters are going to work. We're going to get that done. We're going to get them to you. What that means, though, is, are you prepared to interview them by next week? And if they were like, well, no, this, that, and the other, well, when is that actual start date? Like, when do you actually need them? Because that dictates for us too, a couple of things. And then how committed are they to us? Are they committed to us? Are they willing to interact and engage and respond to your emails, respond to your inquiries? Are they giving you feedback about candidates' resumes? Or do you send a resume and then it's silence and you never hear from them again? So how committed are they? So these are important things to really be thinking about in that job order. And so what are some of the other factors that, and all of us will have a different format, a different structure, and I do want to know different formats, but what does a solid job order include? It includes other things that we may not even think about. And again, it goes without saying, it depends on how much time the client gives you, and then based on your own role, based on what kind of work you do, what are some of the most important questions will have to be decided if you have limited time. But what are those performance standards? Again, if it's a permanent position or a direct hire and they like, it's important, or maybe even it's contract, like, well, what is expected of the person? Are there certain KPIs or metrics? What are the working policies? COVID protocols, maybe that's kind of getting a little bit older now, but what are the hours? What's the term length, start date? Pretty obvious stuff. What about the information about the knowledge, the skills, the abilities required? Can the client even give you insight on where to locate the right candidate? Maybe it's a unique skill set. Are there certain industry associations or groups that we may be able to look at? What do they offer? in terms of income benefits culture? What is stretching the job order? Anyone have any thoughts around this concept of stretching the job order? If you want to share, type into chat. What does that mean to you, that expression, stretching the job order? Any thoughts?
Any concessions that are available?
Okay, like what?
Like any ways to be able to, if you found someone with XYZ, but they didn't meet the exact requirements of the opportunity, would there be flexibility in considering their candidacy?
Yeah, 100%. And so for me, it's so much about the stretching the job order. And I do the same thing with candidates. How do I stretch? I call it stretching the candidate. So stretching the job order. Well, we need 5 years experience. Okay, gotcha. But what if I have somebody who's got 3 years experience and they are like superb and really top level? Do you not want to see that person? Yep, I want to see that person. Great. What if it's somebody with 2 years experience? No, 3 is the cutoff. Okay, for sure. So the 2-year person who's really amazing, great references, you don't want to hear about them. Nope, 3 is the minimum. Excellent. We are only willing to offer $50,000 for this role. Okay, so if I have somebody who's at 65,000 and they are honestly like really amazing and they've done this, that, everything, but they're at 65, should I not bring them to your attention? Well, yeah, I think so, 65. What about if they're at 70? No, 65 is the cutoff, right? So really stretching that. So you're opening up that pool of candidates on how many, like it broadens the pool, right? So I've had clients say they must have a university degree. But what if they have a college diploma and it's in the same field? And in fact, it's even more hands-on and it's more technically related than the university degree. Well, yeah, we would consider that. So it's asking those questions and not just taking, not because we shouldn't be order takers. We need to take a full job order and understand it, but not just taking an order, like not being an order taker, rather asking the right questions so that you have a broader pool of candidates. Or if you're somebody who doesn't do the candidate side of it and you're doing the BD side, the candidates that you collaborate with, or the recruiters, I mean, that you collaborate with, helps them open up that pool. And again, why should the candidate join your company? If we have a candidate that's exploring 3 different contracts, and because there's a lot of options right now, why would they join your company? Why would they quit their full-time job to come join your company? Issues, challenges, so on and so forth. So those are such important factors that go into the job order process. So other things that we're going to look at is just basics on sources of additional information. And you guys can maybe kind of type some things into chat as you think about them. But at the end of the day, if we do our best, we get as much information as we can out of the client, and we want even more information because it might help us identify where do we find these candidates? How do we sell this opportunity to the candidates? And we just can't get enough information out of the client themselves. Well, let's look at other things. Well, what's in your CRM already about that company, about placements that have been done or any information? Doing a Google search, quickly understanding a little bit about the company. Have they been in the news? Have there been any awards? Are they public? Are they private? What kind of charitable organizations are they involved with? Whatnot. Glassdoor, obviously is a good place to look. And just candidate intel, sometimes it's based on the candidates that we've already interviewed who have worked with that company or who've already shared insight. What do we see on LinkedIn? What do we see on social media about that company? Maybe these companies have social media accounts that give you a little bit of a bird's eye view into their culture. What's actually in the job description, right? So all of those things, online reviews, again, maybe there's what's going on in that particular industry of itself. So industry market reviews, any other understanding a little bit about maybe who the competitors are, things like that. So there are other things that we can be doing to try to fill the gaps the best that we can, so that we know how to find candidates, but we know how to sell the roles to the candidates in a way that's attractive and that's appealing. Because our goal with candidates is not just to identify the candidate, is to get them excited, is to get them say, yeah, actually, I am interested in that company. I would like to put my resume forward. Or if it's a temp assignment, yep, sign me up, send my resume. I'm ready to start on Monday. But we want to be able to get them interested enough to say yes. Otherwise, we've done a lot of work and we're not getting candidates excited. So in short, on this, it's important that we make sure that we have all the information that we need at the beginning. By spending a few minutes making sure we have the right information, we will save time in the long run. At the end of the day, we will save time in the long run. And that's what we need to remind the client by spending a little, like even an extra 15 minutes with me. There is so much additional information we can get. And then we will be less likely to miss candidates or fail to get them committed to the job. And so these are just some examples of other things. When I was able to get really long job order intakes, there would be a whole bunch of other things that I would dig into. And maybe these are some things that are important to still dig into, but general information, like, well, what are the titles that I need? Like, this is a part of what I would do after getting a full job order. Is like, these are some of the questions I might be asking and thinking in the job order intake, but then I'd go and be like, okay, how do I kind of figure this out? Well, what are all the titles? It's not just admin assistant, because there's a variety of other titles related to that. What are alternate titles? What's one rung below that title that maybe that person can be willing to move into the next one? Well, what's the main industry? Are there sub-industries, if it matters, if they come from a similar industry? What are the companies where they come from? Who are the direct competitors? Who are the indirect competitors? And so really thinking about how do I go about and finding the right candidate to help me in that sourcing. Any questions or comments before we hop into sourcing? Again, it's all straightforward and hopefully to some reminders. Okay. So that next step in all of it is, well, one, the job order. Again, I love that. It's like the heart of the entire process. And now it's like, okay, we know what we're dealing with. We know enough, hopefully, to kind of figure out where we go next. And so really, it's important, and this might be too obvious of a question, but it's always that question, well, why do we need to source for new candidates? Well, we have lots of candidates in our database. We have lots of candidates in our CRM. So why do I need to go and find new people? It's too obvious of a question. I understand that. But many consultants have stated that they simply don't have time to like truly prioritize sourcing. So what ends up happening is we end up working with the best of who we find the fastest, which can definitely work well. So we end up working with the best of who we find the fastest because we don't always have the time to be replenishing our quote unquote inventory of really good candidates. So that could definitely work well. But what about when we have clients that are pickier than we're used to? What about when we're looking for that purple squirrel candidate who just is hard to find? And so there's things that we need to think about is, how do I constantly keep a really good matrix of good candidates? And it's hard when we're busy and we're sourcing and we're working with this and working with that to make that happen. And one of the things I work with the people that I train and I coach in my company is, even if it's for 2 hours a week of proactive sourcing, 2 hours out of a 40-hour work week, or if it's a longer work week for some, like, how do I shave off parts of the day? So really think about time management and get rid of the stuff that's not high productivity, get rid of the stuff that doesn't actually contribute to the end result of my job. And even if it's squeezing in 2 extra hours a week of proactive sourcing. And so the key to get candidates in the door and out to the clients fast is having a really good pool of good candidates. So we want to think about not wasting time on the quote unquote busy making stuff. And so thinking about how often do you leave or end your day thinking, oh, I was so busy, but nothing really of value was done. If we really, really dug down and kind of dissected, was there really high value, high touch activities? And maybe nothing actually moved forward in the business. And so one of the things that is always important to start each day is really asking ourselves this question. Well, what do I need to do today to move my job forward? What do I need to do today? What are the top 2 or 3 things? Not top 10, because that's too lofty of a goal, but what are the top 2 to 3 things I need to do today to move my desk forward? And then at the end of the day, we ask, did I do the things that will build my desk and move my business forward? And so if the answer is no, then we need to figure out what to stop doing so that we can find more time. And that whole dialogue is about finding more time to find candidates and to source so that we've got a stronger pool of candidates that can be readily available to clients faster. And so the idea of the sourcing is obviously to build and maintain a candidate database that evolves and becomes self-sustaining. It's the sum of a recruiter's worth. And I know that sounds facetious, but it's not the sum of a recruiter's worth. But in a way, we are only as good in terms of making placements as the candidates that we have. Like I said, we can have all the job orders like on our desk. We could have 100 job orders to work on. I know that's like, we could have 10 really good job orders to work with, but if we don't have 10 really good candidates to fill those job orders with, we're not going to make placements. And so I often say that as a recruiter, like some of our worth, quote unquote, in terms of that job of placing candidates comes down to the candidates that we have, but also the relationship that we have with our candidates, so that we can get referrals from candidates. We can have a trusted relationship so that hopefully they don't pull the wool over our eyes and us getting caught off guard with surprises because we haven't developed a good enough relationship. And that's going to happen regardless of our relationship, but this is really important. And so this is where also that selection criteria comes into play. So with recruitment, like finding candidates, but then selection criteria. And so this idea of selection criteria, of course, we first need to know what the selection criteria is so that we can accurately source the right candidates. And we do that to determine the selection criteria by having those conversations with the clients. And so I'm curious for everyone, when you're thinking about selection criteria, and some of you might have certain niches that you spend more time on or types of roles that you spend more time on. If you were to think of, on average, selection criteria for some of your roles, what comes to mind when I say selection criteria? So what selection criteria would you potentially use when looking for your types of candidates? Like, what are some of the key things that you're looking for? So for example, when I was running a sales desk, I looked for candidates who had, usually our clients wanted a business degree. Usually they wanted someone who was selling in their direct industry, selling to their direct clients. Usually I look for somebody who's received awards, like sales awards, top performer awards. I've looked for people that have met or exceeded their sales quotas. So those would be like my selection, the selection criteria from the hard, like more of the hard stuff before looking at the soft skills. So what are some examples of selection criteria that you typically commonly look for in your candidates? Usually with their labor experience in industrial settings. Communication skills, tech savvy, some office skills. Okay. So kind of like, so having that as your baseline, accounting degree is important. So having some of those baselines. Now, when you see this slide here and you see this, or CPA, when you see this chart as an example, and a lot of us don't do this in recruiting, most of our clients do, especially if they're in a HR department or recruiting, like internal recruiters, they usually have some kind of selection score, like a scorecard. And I'm curious, is this something that you have also done, is created some type of basic scorecard that helps you identify candidates A versus candidate B versus candidate C versus candidate D versus candidate E, and which of those 5 get put in front of your client based on some scoring scale? Does anybody do that? And you can just type in chat, yes, no.
I would say not exactly the same, but what we do is we have our, like for office clerical roles, we have our own internal testing. So based upon the scores of the testing, and their overall interview and their communication skills, we sometimes do decide that this is our top category of candidates, and that's how we decide ABC.
Right. Okay. Yep. Nope, that works. And Joey Ann, you said yes before when I was recruiting sales. Okay.
Before when I was in the Philippines, I was in an automotive industry. So usually we hire like salespeople. So since that is a very critical position in the industry, so we have like a STAR assessment, like situation, task, action, and result. And then we have a scoreboard for that. And that like whoever has the highest score between the candidates, so that we feel like that's the right candidate for the position.
Right. Okay. Perfect. And so, yeah, like for me too, like running a sales recruiting desk again. So this was something that, again, and I share this because this is often something similar-ish that our clients are using, right? They're thinking about that when they're interviewing our candidates and they're going through their scoring systems and whatnot. Not all of them, but some of them. And it really helps us as recruiters to make in our best possible capacity to make an unbiased decision around which candidates really fit the selection criteria, which candidates really are measured against those KSAOs, so the knowledge, the skills, the ability, and so that we can make a fair comparison between those candidates. And so just something to think about, but it's really the idea of selection criteria is really developed to guide recruitment decisions. And so selection criteria and recruitment selection, if you Google it, if any of you don't come from a classic HR background or an HR degree or studies, that this terminology is not an ACSESS terminology. It's an industry terminology that you'll often hear from within that HR realm. And so selection criteria is developed to guide those recruitment decisions. During the recruitment process, applicants are assessed to the context to which they meet the selection criteria. The preferred candidate is selected according to their overall suitability and best fit with the criteria relative to other candidates, in addition to the other factors that come into play, the soft skills and the communication and some of those other things. But this is important to help us as well, and important for clients. And so you or your clients, again, they may use an actual grid or matrix like this, but it's helpful to create a grid, and it's not going to work in every scenario. You might run a desk where you literally have like hundreds of applicants that come a day, or like way too many applicants. But if you're narrowing it down, sometimes this helps depending on the situation and the scenario. But there are lots of things that we also want to be thinking around, that there are so many tools and so many things, that online resources that we have at our disposal, that our clients have at their disposal. One might think that sourcing candidates for a particular position is easier today than in prior decades, which on one hand, yes, it is. Like when I started in this industry over 20 years ago, I'm going to make myself sound old now, but when I started, like LinkedIn wasn't a thing. Like LinkedIn was not even a conversation, and maybe it was something, we just didn't know anything about it. We really hard to find names of candidates, and it was really like going through the yellow pages sometimes, and like flipping through pages and calling names of companies and trying to source candidates and figure out who managed what department. And so that makes me sound old, but really it's like, so yes, on the one hand, sourcing candidates, like when LinkedIn first came out, I remember thinking this was the greatest thing since sliced bread. I couldn't believe it. And when I also started recruiting, you never heard the terminology talent acquisition, just wasn't a terminology. Internal recruiters, basically not. We were dealing with HR. And so it was easier for us to be able to sell to HR how we really are an extension of their team on their recruitment extension. Then over the years, talent acquisition came in, LinkedIn came in, Indeed, like ZipRecruiter, or whatever all of these other, sites are, Monster. And so it has actually, yes, it's become easier to find names of candidates, and we don't have to headhunt them the same way that we used to, although I always recommend picking up the phone and calling people. It's faster. But it's also become harder because our competition is now harder because our clients are doing the same stuff that we're doing. And so according to veteran recruiters, the task of effective sourcing actually remains daunting, if not even more so. And so there really is no single best method for sourcing, but there are definitely some common mistakes that recruiters make when sourcing. So when you look at this list here, number one, making assumptions about candidates that you've never met. Sometimes recruiters will just, email a potential candidate, use a standard blurb that they've cut and pasted into other emails that say something like, I've got the most amazing job for you and I know you're going to love. Well, really, it's not a good approach. With that approach, when you approach a candidate with this attitude, we're assuming that we know something about someone that you really don't know anything about. So the truth is you have no idea what they're going to like or not like. And when we do that and we just spam everybody in mail and LinkedIn, you risk losing any possible trust that you may have otherwise have gone. So it's really about personalization still, and not just sending an email to 300 candidates and hoping. No, it can work. I'm not to say it hasn't worked and it can't work, but it is a bit of a not a good best practice. Discounting active job seekers, it's a little bit different now. When I was recruiting, like really in the thick of my early years of recruiting, there used to be this common belief that if someone is actually applying for a job, then they might be a desperate job seeker. And many recruiters today do still believe that. And some of our clients still have that attitude. Well, I only want to hire somebody that's currently working if they're looking for a permanent employee, as an example. Different when you're talking about temp and whatnot. But it really also depends on the role you're looking for. Obviously, if you're hiring somebody that's temp, that's different. If you're hiring perm, that might be different. But that mentality is old school now, where it's like, well, they have to be working. I'm not going to hire anybody that's been on the job market for a while. And we still hear that from clients. And it's up to us again to educate them. There are plenty of excellent candidates out there who may not be employed for one reason or another. That has nothing to do with their ability or their performance, whatnot. So we really want to make sure that we're not undervaluing or discounting those individuals who are proactive, because they could be the right candidate and the best candidate. Sometimes it's also writing a general job ad that just doesn't weed out weak matches. It takes a millisecond for the people these days to apply to a job. And for this reason, it's often easy for a recruiter to amass thousands of resumes when placing an ad online. And so what's wrong with that is that unless we're setting some kind of bar for a candidate to jump over, it's so time consuming to go through hundreds of resumes. Even dozens of resumes, it's time consuming. And so putting a few things in the ad to knock out those people who are just sending off their resume without considering if they're qualified could also be of value potentially. And then I'm going to kind of counteract that a little bit in point number 5. But the other one would be turning a blind eye to candidates who don't fit to a T. So this is also a common mistake that recruiters make. And when I coach our recruiters who are struggling to get enough candidates, and we talk about this, they're often so hung up on only finding candidates who are a 10 out of 10 or a 9 out of 10. And a lot of recruiters are set on candidates having specific set of skills that match to the T, and turn a blind eye to any profile or any resume that may fall outside of that line, to, that predetermined list of qualifications. So while yes, we want to make sure they have the knowledge and the skills, but if we're being too rigid, and that's where stretching that job order is important. If we're being too rigid on skills and experience, we can really miss out on people who have terrific attitudes, who have really good skills, but maybe shy by a year or two, or maybe they've got almost all of the skills, but not 100% of the skills. And if we can do a good job screening them, interviewing them, and presenting them to the client in an effective way, right? We just don't want to make assumptions. The client might still say no if they're not a 10 out of 10, but that comes also back to us educating the clients by letting the clients know that I love it if we can get you a 10 out of 10 every time we bring a candidate to you. But the reality is that's not going to happen in most cases. That is just the hard reality. And that comes down to us talking to the clients about, we are going to be so excited if we can bring you 3 candidates who have that 7 out of 10. And if they have the 8 or the 9, that's a bonus. That's a big bonus. But we are really excited by 7 out of 10 and explaining why, right? These people have solid recommendations on LinkedIn, or they have really good backgrounds, they have good experiences, so on and so forth. So we shouldn't be turning a blind eye when they're at least a 7 out of 10. Now, point number 5 contradicts point number 3, where it says placing all your faith in a well-written ad. Often recruiters feel that they're doing something good if they amass thousands of resumes from placing an attractive job. But if we end up with a giant stack of resumes at the end of the day, we have done something terribly wrong. Our job postings are way too generic. And so most recruiters take a summary of qualifications that they don't understand, and then we post an ad. And then we spend all day going through those resumes, and all the time that we really have is just to do a basic quick glance at the objectives or the quick things on the resume. And that's not really how cost effective. And we really want to make sure that we do not have 100 resumes to go through, that we have a lesser amount actually of those who might be the right one. So I know that's, we could still write the most customized job ad possible and still get hundreds of resumes, or we may customize it and get no resumes, but being very strategic in how you craft your job ads is important. And then the last one, or the 6th one, is I have no time to source. This is another big mistake that recruiters say, well, I have no time. And we talked about that before, and that we have to make the time. Like, it's like an apple a day keeps the doctor away. When it comes to recruiting, I say 30 minutes a day keeps the bill collector away. So whether you schedule in 30 minutes a day to source candidates, or you 2 hours a week, whatever that looks like, build it in. And then another huge mistake is just not having a sourcing strategy in place. That is a big mistake that a lot of people make. And having a strategy, we often take a kind of a cowboy approach where we're like, we're just going to kind of try here, try there. And then it just becomes a little bit chaotic. And if we've got a lot of jobs we're working on, it becomes hard to really stay focused. So that's something to be thinking about, is really having a strategy. Any questions? Okay. I'm not going to go through all of this. This is just a reminder of some of the stuff you may have already learned in some of your sessions, or you may learn in future sessions. But just factors that you're going to consider. And it can't be said enough that ignorance in our industry is not an excuse to discriminate. We need to always do what is right. We always need to do what is the law, and not just do what is easy. So we want to do what is right, not what is easy. So we have to always think about legal requirements, the bona fide occupational requirements, what's within the Human Rights Code. Again, we also want to be thinking about the client urgency, the importance to fill a position. If the client says, I don't need to hire for 6 weeks, and it's going to be a contract role or a temp role, but we know it's going to come up, like, do you need to work on that today, or do you have more pressing things today? We want to always consider the client's in-house recruitment. We want to consider Employment Standards Act, employment equity. What is the complexity in the nature of the work? What is the availability of the candidate pool and supply and demand? So things that we're thinking about before we even begin the sourcing process. But again, most of those things we're not delving into today. So a couple things here is really thinking around recruiting sources for headhunting. Lots of sources, potentially a lot more. We're not going to go through each one of these, but it's just really just to highlight that so many times I have worked with people, they're like, well, I don't have a lot of places to headhunt candidates. Like, where do I find people to headhunt? Well, yes, LinkedIn is one. And we know what the job looks like. Hopefully we've got the job order. We have an idea to, like, the job order will help us validate the selection criteria. So how do we validate the fit, that selection criteria? But then it's like, where, right? Where are we finding all these people? And so there's a lot of methods. It can get very overwhelming. We don't want to use every single method every time. You want to pick and choose so that you can have a plan. You can have a strategy in place. When those plans and those strategies don't produce the results, then you go to the next couple of things. And so we want to think, though, there are so many factors. There's, again, all the online sources. We talked about before some of the client sources, of which I'll remind you again, but LinkedIn, Talent Insight, LinkedIn Recruiter, Twitter, searching followers of companies, maybe posting, sharing, connecting, liking, right? That's kind of a longer term connect. Facebook, there's definitely good recruiting. We're not doing a sourcing session today on how to source within these sites, but Facebook and Instagram, Google, X-ray search, Boolean, staff directories, trade show member directories, if they still post people on there. There's lots of things, association websites, sometimes just a lot of Googling, Zoom info. There's ways to post job ads, right? We can post an ad on Facebook. I've posted ad in Facebook groups before, Twitter, Instagram, do shout outs, maybe a free ad on Kijiji, depending on the nature of the job. Ads on LinkedIn. So whether it's paid ads on LinkedIn that your company pays for, or doing just your own shout outs. If you do your own shout outs on LinkedIn, make sure there's a photo and an image and it's appealing so people look at it. Maybe there's associations within your industry that you're looking at. If you're dealing with accounting, maybe CPA, I don't know if there's costs to those things, and everyone has different budgets. I have posted ads with universities and their student departments. I have reached out to college instructors and professors that have forwarded my job descriptions to their students that are graduating. I've made placements that way. I've posted ads on niche job boards, again, industry websites. There are so many different ways and things that we can do on where we can get that message out and where we could expand that reach so that we have more candidates and more opportunities. And I've often said to a recruiter, when they say, I can't find anyone, I'm like, but have you tried this? Have you tried this? Have you done that? Have you gone here? Have you gone there? So don't tell me you can't find anyone until you've actually done all those things. So it's really thinking about, where do I really build that pool? And then just some sources, again, as I've kind of alluded to already, like how do we get those names? So it is, again, those professors. Maybe it's reaching out to the representative. I've had multiple conversations over the years with representatives of the Building Supply Association or construction associations or marketing associations, food processing associations. I've had, reached out to people at those or associations and picked their brains over the phone and explained who I was and why I was calling. Sometimes they're willing to share, sometimes they're not. Contacting your past placements. How about the people that you have happily placed and they are either still where you placed them or they had a good experience with you, and reaching out to them? Who do you know? I'm making another, working on another search, asking happily placed candidates. They're usually good sources of referrals. Sometimes it's about contacting all the candidates we've ever spoken with that's relevant to those types of roles. And again, I've said that to people I've trained. I'm like, at the end of the day, have you contacted past placements and asked them? No, I never thought about that. Well, have you contacted all the candidates that you've ever connected with? Maybe sending those ones a quick email. How about those reference checks? When you're conducting reference checks, do you turn that into a headhunt call when appropriate? When you're interviewing candidates, are you asking them who are 3 people that you know who are looking for a similar kind of position? Or who 3 people that you know that you have a high regard for that may enjoy hearing from us for our services, right? So it's constantly thinking beyond just what I find on LinkedIn and what resume was sent to me. Any questions or any examples that anyone would like to share that might go beyond some of these examples I've expressed? Okay. So let's take a look here, and then we are going to take a break. So when we also think about this idea of making passive sourcing a daily activity, I call this a sanity saver. Again, 30 minutes a day keeps the bill collector away, and that's sanity saver. So however that looks, with a phone and a good search tool, we can find 3 to 4 top people for any assignment within 2 days. And so one of the things I encourage people to really think about when it comes to passive candidate sourcing, so finding candidates even before you have a job for them. Referrals from past employees. So Joanne, what do you mean by that one?
It's like we already placed someone and they know someone, so they refer.
Oh, yeah, totally. 100%. Yeah, that's for 100%. So, again, it's really, really thinking, have I really done this? Have I done that? Have I gone here? Have I gone there? Like before we can honestly say that person doesn't exist. Now, sometimes going through all of that effort, like sometimes going through all of that and all of that, we do balance like effort versus return on investment. And that's, everyone will have their own individual balance on that. So some will be like, yeah, no, we got to do everything. Doesn't matter the job, doesn't matter the fee, doesn't matter. Like we do everything to uncover everybody. And some have more of a policy where it's like, listen, if it takes us 4 days to find one candidate and it's a very low return on investment, and we're just not going to get anywhere, do we really do that or not? And everyone will have their own opinion. Every manager that we have, every whatever, like has their own set of rules on what they do. But if the idea is that we'll do whatever it takes to find the right person, regardless of the client, regardless of the job title, regardless of the return on investment, then it's really looking at like all avenues, like doing as much as we possibly can. And also really knowing, well, what does that look like? What does our metric actually look like? And are we headhunting? Are we doing what our job titles, without our job title actually being headhunter on our business cards per se? But at the end of the day, if we're recruiters and we're helping clients find candidates, our job isn't just to find candidates that apply to our job postings, because the client doesn't need to pay us to do that. They can do that themselves. Our job is to find them the very best of who's out there, regardless of the source that candidate, how they came. And so we want to be thinking, well, if our job is to find new candidates, how many am I doing? What does my own metric look like? And sometimes in some of our jobs, and every company again is different on the structure. And we've hired and I've interviewed a lot of candidates who that is their 100% to their job, is 100% just to review resumes that come to them, because that's the structure of their organization. So there's nothing wrong with that if that is the structure of the organization. But if it's not the structure, and the structure is to also go out there and find new people, to bring new people in directly, not just through active applicants that come to us, but through passive or aggressive, active headhunting, not aggressive, but active headhunting. Think about, well, how many am I actually doing? Like, how do I move that needle forward? How do I grow the business? How do I grow my pipeline of candidates? How do I truly build a candidate matrix? And it's, well, how many headhunts am I doing each day? Am I actually doing reach outs on LinkedIn that's not just an in-mail of 300 people with the same message? Am I directly trying to connect with people? Am I actually trying to reach people on the phone these days? And how do I do that? Am I calling them at their place of employment? And stretching outside of my comfort zone and doing those things. That is super old school, but old school is the new school sometimes, because we have to be competitive. We have to do what other people aren't willing to do. And sometimes that is picking up that phone and trying to reach somebody. And you're hoping that if I call the 1-800 number at wherever they work, and you ask to speak with Jane Smith or John Doe and Jane Doe, John Smith, they put you through, and then you're able to, like, we're not today training on that headhunting script, but am I doing some of those things? And again, not every business that's required, but if you are, start tracking some of your results and seeing, what do I do? And just, am I finding more people? In chat, I'd like to know how many of you do active headhunting? Or if you're not running a full 360 desk, or you're not on the recruitment side, do your peers? So who does the headhunting, and how often? Again, this isn't a right or wrong, good or bad, no judgment. It's just out of curiosity, because a lot of people, it's kind of, again, it's such old school that we need to make it the new school again, because we have to stand out and get candidates faster than ever before. So anyone do that active headhunt, the cold call? And if not, why or why not?
Yeah, we do it all the time. I think it's like the
Awesome.
best way to be able to get people. I mean, I think that getting your referrals is amazing and connecting with people that way. And that's great to be able to have even that percentage of what that looks like. But I think that you need to be able to also do cold calls just to make sure that you're really expanding your pool of candidates.
100%. It's important. It's so important. So good. Glad to hear that. Okay. And Navneet says, I do it. Excellent. Good. Okay, so we are currently at 1:20 my time. Why don't we take a 10-minute break? We'll come back exactly at 1:30 my time. So stretch your legs, if you have to check your quick email, and then power it down again, get some water, tea, coffee, and then I will see you in 10 minutes. Here, if you don't mind, just let me know that you have returned. If you don't mind just shooting a message in text or in the chat, just letting me know that you have returned.
I'm here.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. So I think that was Navneet that said that, and Joanne.
Yep.
Perfect. Okay, so let's hop back into things. So we are now in step 3. First up, we were talking about the job order and the criticality of a good written job order. And then about sourcing, where to find candidates as part of that's the selection and recruitment process. And now a very large part of that selection process is the screening. So we've got the job, we know how to find candidates, maybe at this stage we've collected some candidates. And now we have the really, really, really important task of identifying the strength of these candidates and really determining that knowledge, determining that skill, determining the ability and other factors of those candidates, like those KSAOs. And so really what we're really wanting to think about here is, how do we go through that process? How do we create a robust enough process so that, number one, we determine which candidates get put in front of our clients, but sometimes that screening process, whether it's a quick phone screen, will then help determine whether they receive an interview with us to take it to that next stage. And so everyone has also a different structure when it comes to screening. And even within our own organization, depending on the type of desk or the type of role and clients and candidates that we're working with, has a little bit of a different process. And so I'm curious to know, for you, some will have what we call like the 2-step process. So the first step is a very quick phone screen. I've received your resume, or I came across your resume, or maybe you've headhunted them and I was looking at your profile, whatever that might sound like. And then move that to more of a formal interview to spend more time with them. It could be a 15-minute screen, it could be a 30-minute phone interview, it could be an hour long, depending on the nature of the role and the level. So I'm curious for you guys, what is that? What does that look like for you? Do you have a 2-step process where you do a quick phone screen, you're like, yeah, okay, they've got this experience, that experience, I want to move it to now more of an interview with me? Or is that a 1-step process where the screening basically becomes the interview? So it's a one conversation with the candidate before determining if they get put in front of the client. And there is no right or wrong. Again, for us, for our temp candidates, it's usually a very quick screen, a little bit of an interview at that same time, and then they may get put forward. If it's, let's say, a direct hire or more of a longer term type contract, then it's usually the quick screen and then scheduling a second interview, maybe the next day or within a couple of days. What's the typical for your structure? If that makes sense.
For me, it's like the pre-screen, what actually they're looking at. Would they be a right fit? What are their, yes and no's, that pre-screen. And then I would just send them some registration in case they're really interested. They'll go forward and register with us and fill up some few forms, and then testing. And then I personally like do the face-to-face interview and then present them to the client.
Wonderful. And so remind me, what type of roles do you recruit for?
Mostly office clericals and accounting.
Okay. And is it typically temp or more in the direct hire?
Mostly temps, and some of them are like direct hires or permanent roles.
Okay. Excellent. Yeah, no, so it sounds like you have a very good, solid, robust process there, which is awesome. Okay. And then Joanne says same process, phone screen, and then you set up the interview. Perfect. Okay. So basically, it's good to hear that there's those processes in place. And because again, it all goes down to consistency and ensuring that we're evaluating people in a way that's number one, efficient, because we do have to go through a lot of people, but also that's consistent, so that we're consistently interviewing and screening people in a similar fashion. And that pre-screen call is, we're looking at a few things. Are we looking at, are they a potential star candidate? Could they actually be the candidate my client wants to hire, or future clients? Maybe it's for a specific job right now or a job in the future. So that's also important, always thinking, do they fit the role today, or can they fit something in the future? Because it fits into the types of roles I recruit for. Will I be wasting my time, for a lack of sounding harsh? But and again, for lack of better words, but am I wasting my time? Am I spending my time interviewing this candidate potentially if they're really not the right fit for the types of roles that I have? And so that's what I'm asking myself during that pre-screen. And also, what opportunities, again, do I have right now for this candidate or in the future? And the other thing that we want to be thinking about is that when we're speaking with candidates for the first time, whether it's our first point of contact, it might be that LinkedIn message. And that's why I do say that kind of that spam in-mail to 300 candidates or 50 candidates, or what that looks like, isn't necessarily genuine or authentic or customized or personalized. And that is part of them having a first impression. So when we can customize and personalize, and if we are connecting people first with in-mail, we want to make a good first impression. And so whether that's your first point of contact with them, personalizing and customizing sets the tone that you're kind of connecting with them, and it sets that impression. Or if your first point of contact is an actual phone conversation, you receive the resume, you send them a quick email back saying, love to connect, great, let's schedule that pre-screen. Or you don't even do that, you pick up the phone and call them right away because their number's on there. But that first impression, either way, is so important. So if you're having a live conversation, it's the tone of voice that's excited, and that it's upbeat, it's confident, it's positive, it's supportive, it's conversational. And those things are so important when you're first having that pre-screen, to really set that stage of that candidate feeling at ease, hopefully not being nervous, and really being able to have a good conversation with you, so that during that pre-screen, at least because I know both of you do that two-step process, to get as much information that you can, so that you can make an educated decision on whether you want to schedule that second step with them, which is that longer interview. And again, because time isn't always on our side, we have a lot of candidates, we have to act quickly. We really have to be protective of our time. Time is short, so we have to be protective of the time that we have if we want to focus our energies on efforts on bringing the right candidates to the right clients quickly. So that's why that pre-screen is so important. And asking some of those basic sample questions that obviously is important for us to understand, like, why did you apply to this role? What is it that you're looking for? Where are you currently at today? Are you currently working? Why did you leave? What are some of your top skills? And getting a good sense. But again, as I mentioned, what are some of those things that we're really looking at that's going to be important for you to understand. And because there are so many options often in front of you for screening and assessment, we do want to potentially think about, well, what are some of the key things that are going to help me also further determine which candidates I get to spend most of the time with? Like, what are the candidates that I'm going to spend the majority of my time and energy with, based on the information that I have, based on what it is that I know of this person. So that phone screen, number one, right? So that we can reduce the candidate pool to a manageable number. We want to reduce that pool down to a manageable number. So if you have 20 candidates that have applied to a job and you want to reduce that down, sometimes you could reduce that down just by looking at the resume and knowing it's not the right fit. But then from there, you call 15 candidates, and of the 15, I really only want to interview 5. So how do you do that? Through the quick phone screens. And you're looking at all the different tools that are readily available for you. So obviously their resume. Some recruiting firms have application forms or candidate questionnaires, things like that, or a pre-interview questionnaire that might be looked at. What is that phone screen? What does the interview show you? Web-based information, that would be more like, and I should change that, it's a little bit dated, but LinkedIn. Like, what am I seeing on LinkedIn about this person? Do they have references? Do they have referrals? Is their LinkedIn profile matching their resume? And not everyone has a LinkedIn profile, especially depending on the nature of their work. But I have so many times come across resumes and I've compared it to the LinkedIn profile and they are vastly different. So to me, that's a big red flag. And I'm looking for those red flags. I want to find the red flags. I'm looking for them. I'm not going digging for issues, but I'm going digging to make sure that there's no surprises. As I mentioned, as recruiters, we don't like surprises. I think the only surprise I've ever liked as a recruiter is when I sent 3 candidates to my client for one role, my client contacted me and said, we love 2 of the candidates and we've decided to hire both. Those are good surprises. Otherwise, as recruiters, we typically don't love surprises. So I like to do that comparison. So web-based information for me would be comparing it on LinkedIn. Reading and scoring. So if you do use a matrix, if you do use a rubric, or some kind of electronic scoring. I just have a message in here. I usually check LinkedIn profile of candidates before calling them. Yeah, perfect. I think that's great, right? You want to check and see what you see there. And again, it's been amazing at how many surprises I've seen. On that, not to dwell on that point, but it's also amazing at how many times, and I'm sure I would guess, and you can type into chat if you've come across this, how many times I have come across a resume in our own CRM that a candidate sent 3 years ago. Now we've received the same candidate's resume now. And even those 2 resumes are so different. Not what's changed in the last 3 years, but the information at that same timeline that when we would have last received it compared to what I'm looking at on the resume now, sometimes is totally different timelines, different dates. And again, there's a red flag. Why am I seeing these discrepancies? So whether our job is to screen candidates in, we also want to screen candidates out because we don't want to have surprises. If we don't catch these red flags, our clients will. And so when we're looking at some of these resumes, we are looking at a variety of things. So we're receiving resumes. Obviously, we want to keep a lot of points in mind, as I've already addressed. But really, from when we're keeping a lot of things in mind, the reason why there's so much that we have to think about is because this is really important to remember. The minute you decide to do work for the client, the minute you start doing work for your client, you become liable. You are an extension of the client. And we're not going to talk a lot about liabilities. Again, that will be in different sessions that you have for your CPC if you haven't already done those sessions. But the minute you're working for a client, you become liable. As I said, you're an extension of them. And so once the decision to work with them, you also need to set expectations with clients as well, and expectations with candidates, of course, but expectations with clients, everything from those turnaround times, both for resume review, interview feedback, to whether or not you have access to their internal systems, whether or not they share the resumes of the candidates who've already applied, or at least, again, a listing of the candidates that they've rejected, so you're not duplicating efforts. But the minute that you start working with them, you're an extension of them. So it's our job to really get to know, in the best ability that we can, who the candidate is that's right in front of us, and to the best that we can. Obviously, there's still going to be ones that withhold information. But if we don't ask, if we don't do our due diligence, then potentially we're running into issues. And so we want to know those questions, like, well, what was the reason for the change of job? What was the reason for the change of job for the last 3 or 4 or 5 jobs? Maybe they have very short stints because they're only doing temp, which is explainable. But what about the longevity of each organization? Is that validated? If they say that there are always temp positions, can that be backed? Is there proof of that? And again, we're not there to interrogate our candidates and make them feel like it's obviously done in a very kind of gentle way, but understanding, excellent. Okay, so those are temp. which firm were you a temp for? Was it for a firm? Was it directly with the companies? Who will be your reference for those? Because I know that our clients will want to be, see that type of thing. So I really want to make sure that we have the backing of that. And again, what are those long gaps in employment? Are they verifiable? Are we just taking their word for it, or are they verifiable? Why the job hopping? Okay, what was that? Lack of career progression doesn't mean that that's a problem. Lack of career progression is not a red flag. If they choose to not, if they like just doing what they're doing, that's okay. But are there missing dates? No education. I'm looking for that. If it's required, I'm not going to assume that they have it. Even, and I'm sure a lot of people have experienced this, where it says on the resume, University of, Toronto, 2018, but it doesn't actually say if they've graduated. That's a big difference to have them put it on their resume to know if it's actually graduated. Very, very big things. And I've learned that the hard way. And without a doubt, under no circumstances are we, discrimination is just off the table. Everyone has equal rights to employment, and we want to treat everyone the same and equally. And so again, identifying those red flags, as I've said, my job is, yes, to rule candidates in, but my biggest job is to rule candidates out, the ones who have the red flags, the ones that can create some issues with clients. And we want to make sure, again, we're sending the best possible candidates to the client. That's what they're relying on us for. And because resumes by design are personal documents, the candidates have free rein to say whatever they want. There's no rules against how they do it. There's no legislation. They can say whatever it is they want to say and put on there. It is our job to identify the truth. And because they can do whatever they want, it can lead to those potential issues that need to be dug deeper. And that's why a proper phone screen and a proper interview is so important, so that we aren't sending candidates to our clients where it can get into a lot of issues. So what could be some examples of red flags? In addition to what I've already alluded to, what are some red flags that you may have come across, or red flags that you can think of? But again, you can type in chat, or if anyone wants to hop on. What are some obvious red flags in someone's resume that maybe I haven't mentioned? So let's see, spelling errors. Okay, yep. So I was just thinking about that. Spelling errors, incorrect formatting, right? So not taking care and precision in the work that they put into the resume, right? What else?
I would say with the invention of AI picking up, I've seen most of the candidates, what they do is they try to map the resume with the job posting. And while doing that, they keep on changing their resume. The person is the same, the contact information is the same, but every time they have a new resume for a new job posting.
Yeah. And so that's an interesting one too, because while it's good for candidates to customize and tailor their resume according to the job, if it's so adjusted and vastly different, then that could be problematic. So that's an interesting point, because it is considered a best practice to try to tailor your resume so that it speaks to the job itself, as long as it's factual, as long as they're not just making it up. So I'm not sure if that's what you're referring to, but yeah, what I have always said to candidates is that if they say their resume can go into a few different areas, a few different directions. Like for me, example, my resume, I could have 3 different resumes and they could be entirely different, because I have training and development, I have recruiting, and I also do stuff in the wellness industry. So effectively, I could have 3 different resumes. And so what I have said to candidates, and when I do training on resumes, I have said, maybe have 2 or 3 that are the same, but the emphasis on what you're applying for is more emphasized than in a different area. So the formatting's the same, all the education's the same, but where you put the emphasis could be a little bit different. So it's a good point that you mentioned there. And so it's really understanding, are they just using AI and their resume is completely not factual based on that? Or is it factual and maybe our job is to help educate the candidate on best practices around resumes? So that's an excellent point that you brought up. Any other red flags? And again, fake resumes, fake candidates. And I think that's similar to what you were just saying there, is that because people are using AI so often to create their resumes, it's often creating these fake candidates where these candidates actually don't have the skills at all, but they're creating it according to that job description. So that's a real challenge as well. So finding the most qualified candidates, how do we go through all of this when it's like, how do we determine that quote unquote perfect candidate? And I say that in quotations because there is no such thing as a perfect candidate. There's always going to be maybe that 7 or 8 out of 10, very rarely that true 10 out of 10. And also, I know this is going to sound contradictory, but sometimes the best candidate is not the best in the eyes of the client. From time to time, we might deal with customers who themselves lack experience in hiring. Maybe some hire the person they like or the person most like them. So meaning that sometimes a client, they don't really understand if they're not in HR, they're not trained in interviewing. They hire someone, I just like that person. Like I like them the best, personality wise, like, okay, that could work. But at the end of the day, when they're on the job, do they have the right skills? Do they have the right knowledge? Do they have the right abilities? And so a lot of clients, and again, I'm not necessarily saying it's right or wrong, but when I have had clients and that's come up, I try to coach them and say, okay, that's all great. You have to like the person you work with, 100%. But at the end of the day, can they do the job? Do they have the skills? Do they have the criteria? Do you think they have the right ability? Like, how does that align? So our job is to make sure that the ones that we do put in front of them have that criteria, have the skills, have the knowledge. And then we're going to talk very soon about how do they fit into the culture and how do they fit into that personality. And so we want to really make sure that we're sending the people that have the right skills. Can they do the job? First and foremost, that is like the bare minimum. You look at the resume, you do your phone screen, you have your interview, you cross your T's, you dot your I's, you validate, you do reference checks, you make sure that they actually can do what they say they're doing. And sometimes I can't remember which one of you had said that, you do some technical testing as well, and you do all of those things before they even get in front of the client. And again, every company will have their own systems and processes on when or if you do technical testing, but can they do the job? Do they have the skills? Technically speaking, do they have the right? Do they have the education? And that's the given. That's the bare minimum. At the end of the day, bare minimum, they have to have at least 7 out of 10 idea. What about those capabilities? So they could have all the skills in the world. They might have the skills on Java development or the skills on this, accounting software system. They might have the skills, but then how capable are they? So it's one thing to have skills. It's another thing on how well can they do the job? How skilled are they? And so where someone might have entry-level skills on one thing, someone else might have more intermediate level skills. So the capabilities could be greater. Maybe their successes have been greater. So it's kind of understanding. Can you do Java development? Yes, great. How long have you been doing it? What are some examples of what you've been doing it? So on and so forth. So that's the capability. So skill and how good are they at that? And then the other aspect is that motivation. And so I mentioned earlier that, again, they could have the skills, they could have the capabilities, they could be like super the top. If you're talking about the sales recruiting and they've got, best salesperson of the year and they've sold to every single one of the same clients and so on and so forth. And they're like on paper perfect. as I mentioned, there's no such thing as perfect because, well, what if they're just not motivated for that job? At the end of the day, do they actually want a new job and why? And do they want that job? And just because they're the best fit for your client in your eyes or what's on the resume, doesn't mean they actually want that job. And at the end of the day, if they have all of these and they don't have that, then it's unlikely we're going to make a successful placement. And that is why motivation of all of this is the most important. And often when I ask people of all of these, which one's the most important? Well, it's motivation. And again, if you like, because you can't squish a square peg into that round hole. And so these are the key factors. It's looking at the whole picture. And so now let's take a little bit of a deeper dive into this idea here around motivation. What happens if a candidate, we explain to them, just, you never know, meet the client. And sometimes when we encourage them to meet the client, they're pleasantly surprised, they get the job and they're happy and they've been there and the rest is history. But it doesn't happen often enough. And so what happens if they've got all the skills, they have the capabilities, the client is super excited when they see their resume. They're like, yes, 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 I want to meet that person. You take your candidate down the path. They go and they have the interview. Your client's like chomping at the bit to hire them. But what happens, from a candidate side, if they're not that motivated? What happens at the end?
Could you repeat the question, please?
So your candidate, so we've encouraged our candidate, they've got the skills, they've got the capabilities, and maybe they're kind of wavering on the motivation if they really want a new role or if they're really motivated for that role. We encourage them to still interview the client. Client loves them, but the candidate really doesn't have the motivation.
They might not go ahead and take the new role for which they interviewed. So we ended up wasting clients' time as well as our time and the candidate's time as well, I would say.
Yeah. And what is someone else? Yes. And someone else was going to say something?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, same thing. Just that if they're not motivated to take on the position, then they're not going to be able to pursue the role at the end of the day. So whether they have the skills and capabilities, the biggest, most important factor is their motivation to be able to actually pursue it.
And then it's common sense, right? And then it just makes us look bad. At the end of the day, like, we end up looking bad. The client's like, well, I don't understand what's happened. And then the candidate's like, I told you I was going to go, because now they're like, our client wants to hire them. And we call the candidate and we're excited. And we're like, well, what do you mean you're not interested? Well, and it was because we've kind of walked them down this path. Like I said, you can lead the horse to the trough, but you can't force it to drink, because it wasn't thirsty enough to drink from the trough. So it's not going to take the job. They're not going to take the job necessarily. Or they're like, okay, they kind of go through the motions and maybe the candidate ends up accepting the job. I've seen that happen too. And then it's like the candidate's like a month and they're like, yeah, this was a mistake. So it's really important that we spend time in the interview when we're assessing the candidates to really, really assess the motivation. And so again, skills, what they're seeking, the skills, they know how to do the required job, the capabilities, they have the right depth of experience, so how good they are. But the motivation, again, this is the most important assessment, and is often the reason why what appears to be a perfect candidate backs out of the process or turns the job down. Getting good at this will put you at a significant advantage over your competitors and save you a lot of time, as more of your candidates will want the jobs that they look at through you. And so how do we assess motivation? What are some of the things that come to mind when we think about assessing motivation? How do you do that?
Understanding what they value, what their career goals are, what they're looking to be able to pursue in the long term, and whether this opportunity aligns with what it is that they're looking for.
Yeah, does it align with what they're looking for? Why does it align with what they're looking for? Those things are important. And so the other way of asking it is, what are some valid career wounds? Right? What are some valid career wounds? So a candidate isn't necessarily going to be motivated to look for a new job or that company, for example, but a job without knowing if they actually have a career wound, meaning that something has to hurt. Something has to hurt. Now, maybe it's somebody who is not working and there's a wound. They're looking for work. But even then, that's not enough. Like, well, what is it about this company that it would excite you more than just putting kind of, a paycheck in the bank account, which those things factor in, and all of that obviously is part of it. But the reasoning behind this is so simple that we want to make sure that the candidate is motivated to accept an offer that's going to potentially be something that's going to fix a situation that they can't currently get accomplished in their current situation, especially those who are currently working. Or let's say someone's on a long-term contract and we reach out to them to say, would they be open to a different contract if they're contractors? Why would they leave this contract to go to something else? Well, maybe something's not happening at that contract. Maybe they're not being fulfilled. Maybe there's, all the promises for project completion and it keeps getting extended, but not extended in the right way, or whatever those things are, something has to hurt enough for that candidate to go, yeah, I'm motivated. And yes, that issue cannot be resolved in my current situation today. I've talked to my manager about it. My manager doesn't seem, that interested in helping me get through that situation. I have to work in the office every day. I'd rather work from home once a week or vice versa, whatnot, right? The commute is too long, the travel's too much. They're not willing to make those changes. These are things that cannot be fixed. And so that tends to be more of that real wound. And like I said, that tends to be more in relation to people who are currently employed. But again, if it's temporary still, right? What's going to keep you on that temporary assignment? Let's say there's somebody who left temporary assignments before they ended in the past. Why did they leave it ahead of time? So what will keep you excited? What will keep you on assignment? Like really understanding those factors just really help in the long run. So spending time exploring that with candidates is quite important. Is why are you looking for change? And can this current role or roles that we may have address those pain points so that hopefully they will be making a good decision. So other factors that we're looking at, again, is those character traits, personality, culture. Those are important things as well. Like really understanding, okay, they've got the skills, they have the abilities, they have the motivation. Those things are in place. Like, so I'm feeling solid. But other factors that come into it, this whole picture, right? That's why recruiting isn't rocket science, but it's an art form. I say it's not rocket science, but it's an art form. It's kind of moving these parts together and making things fit, and how does it work a little bit? And so it's looking at that personality fit, and then looking at that culture fit. And then the other aspect of that is overall. So number one, character traits come from things that we may look at from our own interviews with them, and how are they, maybe there's some behavioral interviews in there, and kind of overall personality. And then we're looking at the end of the day, how does it all fit together? And so we're looking at the person, right? Their skills, we're looking at their character traits, we're looking at their abilities, we're looking at their motivation. Then we're looking at the client. And we're looking at the company itself and what kind of company is it? Is it the right kind of company for this candidate? And then the job itself. Is it the right type of job? And can the candidate do that job? So it's really making sure that, like in this Venn diagram, that all of these factors to some degree kind of overlap properly and well, and maybe more than some degree, to a high level of degree, that these all kind of fit together so that we're considering how is this all going to connect? So when we're determining that fit, the person, the organization, and the person and the job, when we're thinking about a person organization fit, when the values and the interests of a job candidate match the organizational culture. So that is when the values and interests of a job candidate match the organizational culture. And then when we're looking about the person to job fit, that's when the skills of a candidate match the job. So the person job fit, the skills of the candidate. So we're thinking of various factors. We're looking at things around, well, number one, I want to reduce turnover. We want to try to match the organizational culture and business culture and values to the candidates. So what is the organization culture value and who are they? And again, I say some of that with a grain of salt because in some cases, it's not necessarily where we need to do that such a deep dive, depending on the role. If it's a permanent direct hire, 100%. If they're looking to stay there for the long term. Contracts, long-term contracts. Temporary assignments, of course, these factors matter. But sometimes if you're putting someone in like on a one-day assignment, it may not have the same factor to the same degree. So again, it's all dependent, but a poor person organization fit will increase the chance of an employee leaving. So if the person and the organization itself aren't a good fit, there's a greater chance that person will leave. So we want to think about, well, what matters to that candidate? What kind of culture? Do they like that culture where, like, the Google, where it's classically, have been regarded as the fun culture and young culture and all the things that they offer and a lot of diversity and all these amazing things that has given them such a good reputation as an employer over the years. Do they like that kind of culture where the team does collaborate and they do get together and they work together in the office? Or do they prefer to work on their own? Are they much happier working from home on their own behind the computer and not necessarily with other people? And so we really want to think about what is that overall fit look like, right? So what environment is best for them? And just because what we see on their resume is perfect for what we think for that client. But if that's not great for the candidate, if they're like, listen, I don't want to be in an office with people all day. Like, that's just not what I want. I want to be at home. Or I could be in the office, but I just want to be on my computer and I want to do that. Or I want to be on the floor plant. I want to be whatever. Really making sure that those things really, really fit. So it's a win-win on all parts. Any questions or any commentary around that? So then, really just to kind of break down for us as recruiters, there's the interviewing phase is so important. So we've got the screening and we're considering all of these things in the screening and even before we interview them. So we're thinking about as much as we can, are they a fit? Could they fit this role? Could they fit the kind of companies? Where might I fit them? We're starting to think about that, or that may not truly really get identified and deep dived enough until you have an actual interview with them. But really thinking about our ability to really place a candidate is by that proper interview. And again, it's amazing. It's amazing at how many, and when I talked earlier on about us being ambassadors for our industry, that it's so important that we become ambassadors for our brand, ambassadors for our industry. And too many recruiters, and I shouldn't say too many, but so many, there have been situations that I've come across, but I've also heard a lot, where recruiters don't even interview the candidate. That they just get the resume, they shoot them a quick email, and then they submit them to the client because it's a race against the clock. They want to be the first one to get the resume in front of the client. They want the timestamp that they're the ones that submitted a candidate without ever interviewing the candidate. And that's just bad. Like that's not the ideal way of interviewing. That's not the way for us to truly be ambassadors and to really to be able to put our stamp on it and say we've properly qualified the candidates, because we're running into a whole host of issues if we don't do that and properly vet them and go through that process. And so with that, there's different styles of interviewing. There's the unstructured approach and the structured approach. There's no right or wrong. I know I have my personal style, but there's different ways that we get to know our candidates. However, when I say there's no right or wrong, there is a better and there's a best. There's a good and there's a best, I should say. Unstructured is good enough. It's better than not interviewing the candidate at all. But the idea with an unstructured interview, and the reason why I've got the pinball machine on there, is that quite often when we interview candidates where it's not well defined and well structured, we end up interviewing candidates like we're a pinball in a pinball machine, where we're bouncing back and forth and all over the place, where it's we're asking them a question, then we're going somewhere else, then we're flipping over their resume, we're asking them this, we're asking them that. It makes it very difficult to create consistency and fair comparisons between one candidate to the next. And so, again, it's still better than not interviewing at all, but it can lead to some challenges. And so this one does offer, there isn't predetermined questions necessarily. We might have our standards. Why did you apply? Why did you leave? What are you looking for? What's the salary? Are you looking to work from home? Are you on a bus route? The standard questions that we might ask, but it's really not structured. So some of the questions might sound like, well, tell me about yourself. Okay, that's a structured question, but it's not getting into the specifics. It's not really asking specific, consistent details. And so again, different questions may be asked, which means that there's a lack of reliability and then a lack of precision from that structured interview. So it would be almost impossible to even think about doing a candidate matrix because different questions are being different asked. Now, obviously, when we're interviewing candidates, because we don't want it to feel like an interrogation, we want it to be conversational. Some of the questions by default are like, we don't want to just stick to the script. You are going to ask questions of each candidate based on their responses and based on their experiences, but within the context of a structure. And so this is my personal preference, but it wasn't always that way. When I started in recruiting, I was super unstructured. I had too many fall-offs that happened when I was first a recruiter. The fact that I made it through my first year or 2 years is sort of a miracle until I finally figured it out, like, okay, I really need to get structured here. And I joined in a time when we didn't have a lot of training. I ended up creating the training for the company. So I was just kind of left to my defenses to figure it out at that time. And I learned the hard way. My very, very first placement ever was my first fall off ever. And probably because I didn't have a consistent approach to things. And so I ended up, this isn't an example of my job, my interview form, but really creating a structure so that every candidate that I met, I had the same set of questions. Now, it tweaked a little bit if I was interviewing a candidate who sold in the building supply industry, basically the same questions, but a couple of added nuances versus the candidate who sold in the food manufacturing industry. Similar set of questions with a couple of additional things thrown in there that were specific to that candidate's industry. And so I learned the hard way. And then I realized, okay, this unstructured approach is just leaves way too much room for ambiguity, way too much room for inconsistency and frustration. So creating the structure was really important for me. But again, not every company does that. So I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but there is a good, better, and best. And the best is to really be structured, to really come at it where all candidates are asked the same predetermined questions. And because of that, bias is reduced because candidates are evaluated on job-related questions, which are based on analysis of job duties and requirements. So it's more subjective, and the more subjective and irrelevant questions are typically not asked. So I'd love to know in the chat if it's standard procedure or standard protocol in your current role to use a well-defined, well-developed candidate interview form. And if not, if that's something that you think would be of value to you. So if anyone uses a well-defined candidate interview form, yes, we use standard set of interview questions, structured questions specific to industry, job opportunity, and skill set. And I would say the same thing, by the way, obviously for the job order form. So to me, this is the candidate interview form. The job order form is the client interview form. Both sides of it, absolutely structured, is important. Okay. Beautiful. So everyone is doing that. Excellent. And so the interview structure, even though we may be interviewing numerous candidates each week, again, it's really important to acknowledge the need for that good structure, follow it. And sometimes for people who've been doing this for a long time, it's very easy to actually become complacent. It's very easy to go, oh, I don't need to use the structure anymore. Like I've been doing this for 20 years. I already know. No, like it's very easy to actually become complacent. And then we end up missing that vital information. So in my opinion, whether someone is day one on the job as a recruiter or year 30 as a recruiter, using a structured format is critical. And so just the basics, we're not going to spend a lot of time here, but just again, kind of just showing the basic kind of framework of a good, well-structured candidate interview. And again, it really comes down to how quickly you move through each thing, depending on how much time you have. I know some candidate interviews, again, are like quick 15 minutes. It's like super fast, super quick. We're getting them on a temp assignment, like literally tomorrow. Or some of them are an hour long. Someone who do executive search might be an hour and a half long. Some might be 45 minutes long. So the steps of this process will really be dependent on the role and how much time you have. But always, obviously, the good introduction is kind of breaking the ice, making them feel comfortable, agenda setting. I always set the agenda at the beginning of any meeting, whether it's a client meeting, whether it's a candidate interview, just so they know what to expect. And that takes like, 20 seconds. Opening some questions, right? So that one, like that, tell me about yourself. What brings you here today, or whatever that looks like. Breaking down the skills. So let's walk through some of those skills. And now let's go back to those and figure out, well, what is their strength in that on a scale of 1 to 10 in your Java development, so on and so forth. Always throw in some behavioral situational questions. Tell me about a time when. And we'll look at that next. Ideal next role, like what is that perfect next role? What does that look like to you and why? And what's going to make you say yes? What's going to make you quit your current job today to join there? What's going to make you choose that contract over another contract or temp assignment? Obviously compensation, telling and selling. If you have an opportunity to sell to them and to review with them, great, now's the time. Candidate questions, and then closing it off, exchanging pleasantries, setting the next steps. So it's just a bit of a process, but that's like, without showing my entire candidate interview form, it would basically be structured like this. And then I would go in and I would fill in the blanks on what questions I'm asking in my standard forms. But some of the things that is important to think about, and you could just type into chat yes or no if you intentionally weave in behavioral and situational questions into your interview. But I really think it's important to, if we don't incorporate behavioral, if it's all about your skills, you have this skill, yes, check, check, check. Do you have this university or college, check, check, check. That's great. But I do like to weave in 1 or 2 or more behavioral or situational interview questions. And the reason for that is that our clients, and situational behavioral interviewing has been around for a long time, but clients are using that more so now than ever, because that is probably one of their greatest predictors or indicators of cultural fit and team fit and how that person may perform in the job. So they're using a lot more of that. And they're some of the hardest interview questions to respond to. It's very easy for someone to say, oh, this was a project that I worked on and this is what I did. But to actually then address, well, these were the issues, these were the challenges, this is how I overcame it, this is like the result of that, is harder. So I like to throw these into these interviews here because I like to see how the candidate's going to perform. And I like to let them know, like, these are the types of questions that our clients may ask. So getting them to start thinking around that. But the behavioral interviewing is the past. So tell me about a time when you dealt with a challenging client. Tell me about a time when you had a confrontation with a colleague. So these are the predictor of what people may do in the future is what they've done in the past. And so those could be examples like difficult coworker, tell me about a time when you motivated others that led to a positive outcome. So it's not all negative, it's positive. Tell me about a time when you had to solve a problem, when you took initiative, when you went above and beyond. So these are past. What did you do in the past? Could be an indicator about what you might do in the future. And we're not going to spend a lot of time on this. It's just to put it in here that if you are talking to candidates, And you are throwing in some situational questions that's relevant to the job that you're interviewing them for, the industry or the nature of their role, that if you are helping them get ready to meet with one of your clients for an interview, and if your client has shared, or if you think that they might interview with some of this, is to give your candidate insight, to send information to your candidate on how to prepare for this. Send information to them or tell them to go on to, Google star interviewing and how to work through that and how to best prepare them, because those are some good common responses to situational and behavioral style interviewing. So they have to describe the situation and the task at hand and what action did they take and what was the result. So those are all things. But again, we're not going to spend time here. It's just wanted to put that in there as just an idea that I would send a lot of information to my candidates as I'm getting them ready to meet clients on how to prepare for that. And then the other thing that you can throw in is the situational type as well. So the behavioral, you can throw in a couple of questions when you interview your candidates. You see how they handle that situation. But then the situational is more, so one is what happened in the past, which could be a predictor of the future. But the situational is more about what would they do in the future, specifically asking, like, what would you do if an angry customer came in? What would you, not tell me about a time when, but what would you do in future if something happened? What would you do if you made a mistake and no one noticed? Would you be accountable to that? What would you do if an angry, dissatisfied customer confronted you? So it gives us a sense on how they'll respond to that. And then also for clients, these are becoming much more frequently used styles of interview questions that really throws candidates off. So we want them to be as prepared as possible. So couple of things, any questions here or any examples of anything? And I would like to, if anyone has any examples of where they already incorporate situational behavioral interviewing into your process.
I would just reinstate what you said. We also have a question in our interview questionnaire, like the standard interview questionnaire, where we ask the candidates, like, how did they tackle, a situation where they ended up dealing with someone having a challenging personality? What was their take on it?
Okay, great. So again, those are good questions. And sometimes, yeah, like I know that when we're interviewing or doing a job order or we're working with clients, they'll give us some indicator too on certain things like, well, we really need somebody that, can take charge, or we really need somebody that can work really well with people, no matter how hard the situation is. And often those kind of criteria is because they recently have come off of a bad experience, or they've recently come off of a situation where the person that was already in place or the person they're potentially replacing isn't a team player and they don't work well. So they'll start, you'll get some indication on those kinds of things. And those are really good opportunities to craft those situational behavioral questions, is based on what stuff that the client's already telling you. It might give you some indication. So what about roadblocks? For every great candidate we find, there could be a potential roadblock. I'm not talking about red flags here, but that could prevent us from placing them. So not the red flags, but what are roadblocks that we can have? The better we get at identifying roadblocks, the more time we must deal with them, if possible, and work towards a successful outcome. Without identifying them, we may not become aware of them until it's too late. So without necessarily throwing at you the examples just yet, when I say candidate roadblocks that we may encounter that prevents us from placing them, what could be some of those roadblocks? Okay, they're failing a drug test. Yes, that would be a roadblock, but again, drug tests have to be super bona fide occupational requirement. Distance to location, right? Okay, yes, they might be like, oh, I went for the interview and whoa, that was like way too far, 30 minutes, no, thank you, or an hour, right? Okay, so those, yeah, so the drug test again, when that is, but that's a whole other topic on how bona fide that requirement has to be. Distance to location, any other roadblocks that could creep in where the candidate's like, yeah, it can stop us from placing them. Not having a car and location is not accessible by bus. Okay, they realize that there's no bus route or it's a really long walk. So let's see some others here. Some of the things that we may not always be, okay, let's see where they are. Yes, okay. You took the words right out of my mouth. So the other jobs they have applied for, where are they at in their job search? And sometimes we ask those questions. Are you for sure in the job interview? Like or in the interview, we have them, where have you applied? Where are you interviewing? How far along are you in that process? But then if we get them in front of our client and they start going down that path, it's easy for us to assume that they're only looking at this still, unless the candidate's forthcoming. If they're not forthcoming, it's up to us to keep asking that question. And that could be a roadblock. If we're not asking, if they don't feel that they have to tell us, but if we don't ask, they may not tell us. So then we get blindsided when we're like, great, our client's offering you a job. And they're like, excellent, I just accepted another job. And we're like, what? How come you never told us? Well, it's because we never asked. So really always being in front of that's important. Other jobs they have yet to apply for. So that could always be a roadblock, that they're applying, they're interviewing our client, doesn't mean that they're not going to continue to keep applying for jobs until they find the right job. Counter offers, right? We have to factor that in. Would they accept a counter offer if they're in a permanent position, a counter offer if they're in a contract role, where they're like, wait, no, we need you on this contract. Like, we're going to extend your contract by another 6 months if you stay. Contract extension. That they're like, you know what, I was really interested in your client because I didn't think my contract was going to be extended. I just found out yesterday in a meeting that they are actually extending it because the contract ... Next thing you know, they're going to stay because their contract was extended. Again, questions we have to be asking candidates. If you were to receive a contract extension where you're at today, would you stay? Why or why not? Contractual issues. Those could be like some people feeling that there's a conflict of interest, or that they aren't able to join a similar industry, whatnot. Which again could be the same contractual issues. Another contractual issues could be around monthly pay. Maybe that they have to stay where they're currently at if they're going to get their last month of pay. Notice period. I've had candidates that have said, you know what, I actually have a 6-week notice period. And you're like, wait, what? The client needs you in 3 weeks because they're major AGM and they can't wait 6 weeks. They need you that meeting, right? Notice periods can sometimes creep in if they're not managed and we don't ask. In an interview with a candidate, what kind of notice period do you need to give? Do you think you'll have to work it out? Personal situation, last minute, family things creep up, can't control that. Visa requirements, all of a sudden there's challenges, hard for us to control. We can ask questions though in advance, right? Are your visa requirements up to date? Commute geography. Do you really see an issue with having to commute 45 minutes there and back every day? Culture and environment. After they've met the company, they realize, not quite the right culture I'm looking for, because they don't necessarily like who they meet. Maybe they realize, actually, I have a friend right now who's trying to quit her job, but she has a $20,000 bonus coming and she has to wait 6 more months to get that. And she's just not sure if she could wait. She just wants to quit. So things like that could hold her back. Pension. Some people might say, you know what? I have such a good pension. Where I'm going doesn't offer pension. That's a bit of a deal breaker for me. I've decided to stay. The pension is too golden. And poor references, right? So skeletons in the closet, poor references, things like that. Candidate may not like the vibe of the client, or they say, I do not think I can work with his personality, right? Those are, very big cultural clashes. So lots of things that we're thinking about. Like I said, it's an art form. There's a lot of stuff that we need to navigate and that we need to manage to move things along. But to be really good at what we do and really effective, all of these things that we're discussing today doesn't necessarily come into play all the time, but these are things that do come in at some point that we want to be thinking around. So are we finding the right person? Do we have the right job? Do we have the right company? Do they have the right skills? Do they have the right capability? Are they motivated? Are they ready to interview a client? Do they know where they're going? Do they know the interview styles? And then do we know what could happen after the fact on why they might say no to a job? And so then the very last part of our session today is step 4 in this whole process. So again, to remind you, step 1 is the job order. Like someone mentioned, the heart of the process. Number 2 is that sourcing and identifying candidates, and where are we finding our candidates, and all of those avenues that we have to really keep digging and digging and digging and finding a candidate. The third one is the screening candidates, pre-screening, and then interviewing. And now it's the finale, which in some cases, some people do the testing at the beginning. Some people do reference checks before they even submit them to the client, which is a good best practice, but not every company has that protocol. So the final step here is kind of doing the testing, and a lot of different things that that we might be considering. And it's such a necessary part of the selection process, and not enough companies put the emphasis on this. And we're opening up a door to so many challenges if we don't. And it's really necessary also, depending on each organization's contract. I know our company, we are contractually obligated to do background checks and reference checks on every candidate. It's in our contract. So we are legally and contractually obligated to do that. And so it's such a necessary part of the selection process, really, is the reference checking. And I know that reference checking is not perfect. But we are doing ourselves and our client a great disservice if we're either glossing over references or we're just not doing them at all. And so the things that we want to really be thinking around is, well, how do we manage references? First of all, we have to ask candidates for exactly what we need. We need to ask our clients, what kind of references do they want from the candidates? Not them just saying we need 3 references. It's like, wonderful, but which ones? Like this, what kind of references will be the most important? We can try to help with that the best that we can to get our candidates to get us the references. Asking for references, I obviously with candidates, ideally from people who are only bosses, the obvious, no friends, family, teachers, etc. Confirming information, it helps us to confirm things. There is such a high percentage of misrepresentation on those resumes. But we do need release from candidates. And I know for us, we need to get candidates, they sign a release of that because of privacy and because of confidentiality. So there's just so many things that we want to be asking. And I know it's harder and harder these days to get references. Some companies have policies where they won't provide a reference. But to me, it is a big red flag if the candidate cannot produce any references and they throw a bunch of roadblocks like, well, that person retired. That's okay. If they retired, like they can still provide a reference. Oh, that person's not at that company anymore. They're a different company. Doesn't matter. They could still be a reference. So really trying to get through that. And they are done for so many reasons. Again, that assurance that the individual has been successful in their jobs, to validate or dispel maybe some concerns that came up, or any sometimes you just get that gut check. You're like, oh, I just want to double check certain things if we can. And to gain a better understanding. And again, especially if you're contractually obligated, we have to have a legal stand if the candidate doesn't work out. And there's stories, there's case studies. We're not going to go through that in one of your, I think, business ethics one. Often, I think there's an example of what happens when we don't do references. But there's definitely some classic situations where companies have been sued by our clients when a reference check wasn't done and the candidate didn't work out. So we have to be doing the best that we can there. We need to conduct them. It should be part of our daily routine. And we need to explain to the candidate, like, that in order for us to put you in front of our client, we need references. And these are the kind of references we need. We will not be successful getting in front of the client without those references. And sometimes it comes down to being like really, not in a bossy way, I'm not referring to it like that, but just being really firm that this is why we need it. We really want to help you get that job. We really want to get in front of our clients, but it's a part of the process. We have to get references, and these are the kind of references we need. So let's work together to figure out how to make that happen. But what happens if your candidate just does not produce references? Like what's the direction that you take if a candidate's just like, yeah, I just can't get references for you? What do you do? And have you ever been in that situation? So if anyone wants to kind of share their comment around that, what do you do if you just can't get the references?
You say it's required in order for you to be able to proceed to the next stage of the interview process or whatever stage of the process that it's in. Just making sure that they're aware of that from the initial engagement with them before you even present them for the opportunity. Like, you need to be able to just make sure that they're aware of like what could be anticipated if they were to proceed forward into any stage of the interview process or into the reference stage process or offer.
And so, and what do you do if that's like your only candidate and the client's interested in them, but it's the only one that we've been able to produce and we still can't get references?
I mean, you can communicate, depends on what the structure is, on what kind of agreement terms you have with the client. You can communicate to the client and just have an open dialogue with them and see what their thoughts are overall. But most likely, if they aren't providing a reference and aren't able to provide any type of context, unless there's a legitimate reason as to why, like maybe if they didn't have any previous opportunities, if they're a junior professional and don't have any previous references that they can use in a work capacity, you can get a personal reference or whatever that may be, whatever the client's open to. But I think that if they don't have any and aren't open to even obtaining one, then that kind of shows to what quality of candidate they're going to be to the organization as well. Like if they're going to actually do what they say that they're going to do, if it's already been laid out to them.
Yeah. Yeah. So definitely there are some definite ways that we can try to work around that, and we need to have the conversation. But we have been in situations where we've just like we've even just let the candidate, we've had to let the candidate go, or like, you know, we can't. If there's something like, if there's, again, every situation is going to be different, but we have to really work the best that we can with the candidate, have full disclosure with the client, right? At the end of the day, if there's a situation where it comes up, and it's so rare and few far between where this situation actually arises, but complete transparency with the client that we just can't get references, and maybe they do need to sign off on a, you know what, like that they agree that they want to hire this candidate despite that. But so we just want to be careful that because as recruiters, we just want to make that placement, but we also want to make one that's going to stick and work, and that's going to work out in the right way for all parties involved. So it's really thinking about how do we do that, and it all boils down to transparency in those difficult situations where maybe we're just kind of not 100% sure, where we're feeling a little bit like, okay, are we concerned if there's a red flag there? Okay, so another aspect of it is also the employment testing, and the hiring process itself can definitely be time consuming as it is. So it can be time consuming, but also employment testing can be time consuming. It can be costly, it can be stressful for some companies. But a lot of companies utilize employment testing, and firms like ours will often be the ones to implement our own testing that we use before we present them to clients. Sometimes we do the testing on our clients' behalf, but candidates with impressive resumes and who've interviewed well could very well end up falling short when it comes to performance because of mismatches between their traits and job requirements. So they might interview well, their resume is good, but at the end of the day, depending on the kind of testing a company may do, it may help to understand, how do we mitigate the risk of making a hiring mistake? And many employers utilize these pre-employment tests in that selection practices. And there's so many different kinds out there. And I'm sure for all of you, you've probably seen a variety of different things based on the different types of roles that you're looking at. Oh, I think someone just entered the waiting room. Okay, there we go. And so when these assessments are integrated into the hiring process, companies generally try to make a more informed decision. And again, these tests aren't 100% like foolproof. These assessments are things that could help them if, let's say, they're identifying, they've got 3 candidates and they need to narrow it down to the last 2, and then those last 2, they need to narrow it down to the final 1. So sometimes these assessments can help be the deciding factor. Some companies rely 100%, and if they just don't pass the assessment to their liking, they're out regardless of everything else. And some companies look at it a little bit more lightly. So we see everything in between. And there's a variety of different types of assessments again, and some of them really do require that bona fide occupational requirement, like the medical tests, but there's knowledge tests, which test candidates' knowledge about concepts, maybe practices successful to the job performance. My daughter, for example, who's only 17, but she just applied to work at a hotel, and she had to do an online assessment, and it was all about like knowledge. What would you do if there was a discrepancy on the customer's bill? Things like that. So those are kind of like aptitude tests, a little bit of knowledge, psychological personality tests, feelings, traits, behaviors relevant to the job, skills performance tests, their ability to perform tasks, work sample tests. So maybe likely future job behaviors under controlled simulated conditions. So you think of a work sample test could be like a pilot, for example. Another example of a work sample test could be not a simulated situation. It could be where someone puts together a portfolio or a marketing, mini marketing example, or some kind of 30, 60, 90-day business plan. And then again, the physical ability tests, which goes without saying, as I mentioned it already, is there has to be a bona fide occupational requirement. And really that this is an area too that you would spend more time on in a different session, but really looking at the medical and performance tests, really according to the Human Rights Code, to conduct a test of this nature. If that bona fide occupational requirement is not established, then they should not be doing that kind of testing. And so unlike our neighbors down south, and that's even changing more and more there. Here in Canada, we really have the provisions in the Human Rights Code, specifically when it comes to pre-employment drug and alcohol testing. However, there is an exception, and testing is allowed after conditional offer of employment made in writing. Applicants have been informed before that offer is conditional on passing the test, and that it has been proven that the testing is job related, like due to safety issues, like a pilot, as an example. Or other areas like the police and fire service. There's been other areas where it's come up, like social service workers, let's say women shelter workers as an example, physical laborers where they have to require a certain minimum of lifting or things around that. I have had, because I really dealt with sales and marketing recruitment, I didn't deal with other ones like in like machinery or plants, manufacturing, things like that. So this rarely came up for me as a personal example, but I did have one example where my Manitoba-based candidate was interviewed in Quebec. They flew him there for an interview for a sales role, and they did a drug test while he was there. And it was a bit of an issue. The candidate was not happy. And again, for us, there was a bit of a challenge that happened, and the candidate just decided he didn't want to work there because he just felt it wasn't relevant to his sales job. And so there were issues that came up. That was quite a few years ago. So drug testing is illegal in Canada. Again, from what my understanding is, unless it's changed, but from the current that I know, is that it can only be done after an accident or an incident has happened, is from my knowledge, unless anyone else has any other insight to that. Candidate may not has anyone encountered any of these medical or physical or drug testing with your candidates? Okay, so We're kind of wrapping up here. At the end of the day, these pre-employment assessment, there are benefits to it. That's good for us to be aware of, and why our clients use it and why we may use it. But really it helps us to somewhat get to know candidates a little bit better, because at the end of the day, and our clients, to get them to know the candidates a little bit better and a little bit more about how they work, because it really can take months to actually get to know a person, to understand what motivates them, how they communicate, how they think. So these pre-employment tests can help us and our clients not necessarily to see what as a person has done, but a little bit of an insight, a little kind of door opening into who they may be, and to help them, not necessarily for it to be a way to rule them out, but help them to understand, okay, if we hire this person, what will be some of the things that maybe we need to coach them on, or what are some of the challenges that we may see, or what are the areas that we can do where they do thrive, that we can make sure that they continue to thrive. It does help with faster screening in some situations, especially for high volume jobs where assessments can be administered early in that process, and recruiters can focus on the efforts on candidates with higher score. It can increase objectivity, so biases do creep into the hiring process quite often. So this can help that a little bit. As I mentioned, it could help recognize potential, and so not necessarily when a candidate comes to the table with a lot of experience, this would be good with candidates also with little experience. So it's hard to gauge based on their resume or their work sample if they haven't been working long. This might help them understand what are their natural traits, what are their abilities, what that potential could look like. Again, it could help raise red flags to delve a little bit deeper, which is important. Ultimately, hopefully help identify ways to mitigate that turnover. And hopefully avoid costly mistakes. But is this a guarantee of fit? No. Okay, still not a guarantee. So we can do everything in our power to take the right measures, take the right steps, right? Find where to source them, get great candidates, have good conversations to reference check them, background check them. You know, they can do pre-assessment profiles through us, through the client, or from like that we do on behalf of the client. We can do all of this stuff. And it doesn't guarantee fit. So we can do the best that we can. We can go through all of these measures, right? We can use their resumes and do the phone screens, and maybe they fill out an application form. They do the test, they do the interviewing, we do the candidate profiling, the reference checks, the background checks, the work samples. We looked at LinkedIn recommendations. We might look at a past placement if we placed them somewhere in the past. And now we're working with them again, and we can look at all of that history. At the end of the day, we can only do the best that we can, but that's our job. Our job is to do the best that we possibly can to place the right people in front of the right companies for the right job. And that's it for today. We've accomplished everything. I hope that you have taken some points away, and I'd love to just ask what you know, in chat, or if anybody wants to share, if there was anything from today's session that you would take as a personal takeaway, maybe something new or a refresher or a reminder of a personal takeaway from our conversation today. Any personal takeaways?
Well, for me, the personal takeaway is I had personally a bit slowed down on preparing the candidate pool. So I think when you said that we should always have a candidate pool, I completely agree to it. Even if we don't have like a job order, we typically know what kind of job orders we get. So it's always good to have a candidate pool, and I'll be on it from today.
Yes. Yep. Perfect. Thank you.
And just re-qualifying each scenario. So if they're in a contract, what would make them, like, if they were to be extended, would they be looking to be able to proceed if they were extended for like a certain duration of time? I think that even like qualifying like what the duration of that extension is and just making sure that you're understanding like what's most meaningful to them in order for them to be able to pursue their next position.
Yeah, 100%, right? It's like that requalifying. And even if we think we know the answer, we may not know the answer. So it's always going back to that. Excellent. All right. So, oh, go ahead.
Oh, yeah. So being in recruitment for so long, so this is a nice recap, or a reminder to us that we have to follow some of the rules, especially the pooling and making your own pool of candidates, because sometimes we barely do that unless if we have any job order. So yeah.
Yeah, so that's awesome. I'm a huge believer of having candidates in our pool, whether we have a job for them or not. And so many of us and recruiters feel like, I'm not going to headhunt candidates, or I'm not going to reach out to candidates just to check in or update things with them if I
Yeah.
don't have a job for them, because I don't want to waste the candidate's time. And I think that so many feel that way, that why would I contact that person on LinkedIn just because I like their background if I don't have a job for them? It's like, no, that's exactly when you want to reach out to them, is when you're not in a panic, when it's not a 911, when it's like, and explaining that to the candidates too. The reason why I'm reaching out to you is not because I have a job today, but I really like your background. I like what I saw, or I came across your resume in our system. It's been a few years and wanted to reconnect, or your background aligns so nicely with the types of roles that we typically work for. And I'm really calling you on a proactive basis, so that I can find out if you're somebody who likes to be aware of opportunities that come up in the future. And so those are super important relationships, to equally as important as the candidates that we need for our immediate jobs. Because when those immediate jobs come up, you're like, yeah, I've already spoken to 10 candidates in the last 2 months who could be a good fit. I'm going to reach out to them now. So it's really carving out the time to build that pool, whether you have a job for them or not. And like I said, whether it's 30 minutes a day or 2 hours a week, but carving out that time and just time blocking it into your weeks and days, to me, is probably one of the most important, what I would call closest to the dollar activity, is building that pool. So yeah, so good. I'm glad to hear that. All right, everyone. So I wish you luck. Thank you for your participation in this group. You had really great participation, and we had a small group, so I appreciate everyone's efforts and time invested. I hope that you learned a lot, or were refreshed a lot, and enough to help you in this section of your exam. So whenever that exam is, I wish you the best of luck. And by all means, please do feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm always happy to make a new connect. Thank you,
Thanks so
everyone.
much.
Thank you so
you.
much.
Bye. Thank
Bye.
you.